Welcome back to the All... Oh, Jesus, not the All-American Savage Show. Oh, my God. I'm going into freaking podcast mode right now. Sorry about that, y'all. Welcome to Drunken Debates. Appreciate y'all tuning in tonight. We have a very fun show lined up for you tonight. We have a 2v2 tonight, and it's going to be a good time. So, again, this is Drunken Debates, where we value intellectual conversation. So let's begin with going over the rules real quick so my panelists understand, just to make sure that everybody's on the same sheet of music. The way it's going to start is I'm going to basically do a round robin. You can each introduce yourself, and then we're going to go into the first topic of conversation. I'm going to give you the topic. By the way, none of the panelists, and by show of hands, if you were not informed of what the topics were, please raise your hand. None of the panelists were informed of what the topics are. I keep it that way. It's just to basically quiz the panelists to make sure that you're up to date on what's currently going on in world affairs. So, that being said, I'm going to introduce the topic, and you're going to have a 1-minute opening statement on where you stand, just to give a position. It doesn't have to be in depth. It's really up to you. And upon the last person giving their intro, we're going to go into open debate. All open debate requires is you just raise your hand. I will call on you. If somebody's talking, raise your hand. I'll not, and then I'll go to you next. Try and keep your statements within 2 minutes. That way we can get back and forth. I don't want people like time hogging or anything like that. So again, you have about 2 minutes to give your statement and response. And then we're going to keep that going for about 15 to 30 minutes per topic. And then we're going to go into closing statements at the end of each round. Now, in closing statements, I have to make sure that y'all understand this because it is one of the most commonly violated rules that I have until we actually put our foot down. When you are doing your closing statement, it's basically to just reiterate your position. Maybe your position's changed. I don't know. It's really up to you. Do not take any shots at other panelists. And what I mean by that is like Rob goes first and he says something and then somebody else goes next and they say, well, I disagree with Rob because of this. Well, Rob clearly can't respond because we're in closing statements. So please keep it on topic. Ad hom, keep it to a low. You're all adults here. There's no need to do the name calling. Again, we are not Twitch politics. It's not how it works here. We want really good discussions to where maybe you can open somebody's mind, somebody's eyes to opening and seeing something different. So with that being said, when you are giving your topics or when you're giving your intro, whatever the case, if you see me raise my hand like this, you got about 10 seconds left. You don't have to be on the mark, but just to, hey, wrap it up, B. I'm not going to vocally say anything because I don't want to throw you off your game because I know some people get very focused. So if you see me raise my hand a few times, it just means, hey, wrap it up. All right. With that being said, are there any questions from the panelists? You can unmute your mics. You're good. Everybody's good? Okay.
Asking all of my questions while muted.
Okay, yeah.
I'm good.
All right, so here's how it's going to work. We're going to go into introductions. We're going to start with Synth on my top right. Synth, go ahead and tell a little bit about who you are, what you do, where they can find you, and your political affiliations.
Sure, I'm Synth. I do political content on YouTube. You can find me on youtube.com/SINTHE. I'm also the in-house left-wing debater for a channel called The Crucible.
Okay, and then next we have Bunk.
Oh shit. Hi, my name is Bunk. I do live stream content where I discuss a variety of things, everything from the political topics of the current day, the news, to moral philosophy, and everything in between. I basically steal off Synth's position, so their alignments are going to be essentially mine, and they almost laughed. I almost got a laugh out of Synth, that fucking bastard. You can find me on youtube.com/bunkpolitics or /@bunkpolitics, since where I post all of the clips from my live streams and where I go live, so you can interact with me there.
Next, we have Andrew. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Andrew Wilson. I'm the host of the one and only Crucible. Appreciate seeing my in-house left-wing debater here tonight to spar with me. That ought to be pretty fun. And yeah, that's who I am.
All right, and last but most certainly not least, we have Rob. Rob, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Rob Norb, co-host of Drunken Debates. It's really John's show, but I'm happy to be the co-host and give him a chance to debate.
You're definitely co-host.
But you can find me. I'm trying to push my Rumble channel, so it's rumble.com/user/normal America. I stream most weeknights except Wednesday around 9 p.m. Eastern. I consider myself a populist conservative, and you can find me on Rumble. And also, even though it wasn't mentioned by Andrew, at comfy.stream. Both Rumble and Comfy are free speech platforms that won't censor us, which I know all four of us, and five, if you include John, have been censored on the bigger platform. So thanks for having me.
All right, so with that being said, everybody with a show of thumbs up is good to go. Ready to start the first round? Roger that. All right, let's get started. Here we go. First topic, straight out the gate. Ilhan Omar was removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee in lieu of her comments regarding Jewish people in the past. Whether those comments be true or you feel them to be anti-Semitic is of no consequence. It's simply because that's what they're referencing. While debating on the House floor, AOC accused the GOP of targeting women of color regarding Ilhan's ethnicity and also the causation for her removal. Does AOC's accusations have any warrant? That is the question. Does anybody, by show of hand, need me to repeat the question?
Nope.
Everybody's good. All right. So the way it's going to work, we have 1 minute intros per person. We're going to start with Andrew. It's your first time on the stream. Andrew, you have 1 minute. Where do you stand on this, sir? Go ahead.
It's kind of a nuanced position. So is the GOP going after Omar because she's a person of color? No. It's just politics as usual. It's normative politics. It doesn't really matter what she said. They're going to go after her on whatever that is because, well, she's a dirty Democrat. I don't really blame them for doing it, but I don't think that it's some kind of racial bias. In fact, probably the biggest problem the GOP has as far as their base is concerned these days is that they refuse to engage in any type of racial politics at all, kind of moving more towards some type of normativity when it comes to kind of the multicultural, multiracial nature of the United States now. So that seems to be rattling much of their voter base. So no, I very much doubt that the reason that there's pushback on Ilhan Omar is due to the fact that she's a POC.
All right, we're going to push it over to Bunk. Bunk, you have 1 minute. Go ahead, sir.
All right, fantastic. So generally speaking, I think it's a really bad heuristic to abide by, to hold people to their previous statements about given subjects, considering that we all are apt to change both our opinions and our personal character over time. Whenever it comes to specifically Ilhan Omar, I don't think that there's going to be either or explicitly a bias against her because she is a POC. There could be, to some degree, some racial bias. I would be open to somebody convincing me of that, but I don't necessarily know if it's the case that they are going after her solely because she's a POC. I could see them doing very similar things to people who are not POC and just hold similar positions, because at the end of the day, what politics is about, it's about power. It's about having power to enact the change that you want to be enacted. Whenever other people have that power, that contests your ability to do so. And I think that's the biggest issue at play here.
All right. Let's push over to Synth. Synth, you've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. Ilhan Omar, I don't think it's the case that you can really attribute most of the backlash to her race. Obviously, there's going to be some amount of interplay there, given that the backlash is over her opposing an ethno-state. So there's going to be some amount of race involved, and at least the optics of a decision like that. But I don't think it was primarily because of her race. I think it was primarily because of the fact that she spoke out against Israel.
Okay. You still have 30 seconds. You're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Let's push it over to Rob. After Rob's statement, we then go into open debate. And that's basically, like I said, show a hand and just wait your turn. I will call on you. All right, Rob, go ahead.
Right. So it sounds like there's going to be a lot of agreement on this. Yeah, it's clearly not because she's a person of color. What it's about is the Democrats normalize kicking people off committees. When they kicked Marjorie Taylor Greene, they kicked other people like Jim Jordan that off of the January 6th committee. So the Republicans were going to have to get their pound of flesh as well. Ilhan's going to be easy to go after because, like Synth said, she criticized Israel, and that's a safe position to go after everyone about. I didn't think what Ilhan said initially, I didn't chalk it up as anti-Semitism. She's probably an anti-Semite, but saying it's all about the Benjamins, are we really at the point where you can't mention the AIPAC, the Jewish lobby, spends a lot of money and tries to get the United States in a bunch of bullshit wars, and anytime you mention that money, you're anti-Semitic? That's horseshit. I don't agree with that whatsoever. However, what I do find to be interesting is when you go back and you look at that statement that the Democrats put condemning Ilhan Omar's statement, that statement all those years ago was basically just saying, we condemn all hatred, including white people that are evil and straight people that are evil and Christian people that are evil. And they didn't say well, what about people of color that are being, quote, anti-Semitic? So all this is they were going to get their pound of flesh. They went after an easy target. I don't feel bad because the squad was all for kicking people off committees when it was on the other side. But yeah, clearly this has nothing to do with her being a person of color. And I agree with Andrew at the end of the day. If you can say anything about the Republican Party, it's that they're weak and continue to virtue signal just how hip and cool they are with people of color. So
Open
this
debate.
clearly wasn't.
You can keep going, Rob. It's open debate. If somebody has something to add, just raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I
would actually have to, I think Synth brought up a pretty key point. Thou shalt not criticize Israel as a political statement in the United States seems to be something that's very normative. if you do criticize Israel, like Rob says, it's very, very easy to go after any politician that does that. The anti-Semitic trope is pretty much played out. There's plenty of actual anti-Semitism. I'm sure everybody on the panel understands that, and no synth does, and no bunk does. That ain't it. That ain't it. So that's kind of where I stand there.
And I think that I think what's important, I guess, is in the case of specifically Ilhan Omar's case, it doesn't seem like we can divorce it from the racial element. It seems like there's this trend among the mainstream Republican Party, probably a bad trend, and I think that Rob and Andrew would agree with this. There's a trend in the mainstream Republican Party to be hardline Zionist and to not allow almost any dissent towards Israel.
I not only do I agree with it, but it's one of the problems that has now created and created this entire movement of the dissident right wing, which has kind of rallied around that cry of why can't we do any sort of criticism towards Israel whatsoever, and it is bullshit. Essentially, we should be able to. So I don't really know where we have contention here exactly.
I was about to say I'm going to go ahead and divert to. I want to shift it because clearly you are all in agreement with the Ilhan Omar and her accusation being unfounded. But I do want to shift the conversation now into a very serious topic. This was not on the agenda. But why do you feel that criticisms of Israel cannot exist within the GOP? I'll start that one with Andrew.
Because of money. Because of the Israeli lobby is massive and huge, has been since the 70s. And it's going to continue to be. And because of the fact that there's a whole group of Protestant evangelicals who were raised throughout the 80s, 90s, and now into current day to believe that the Israelis are the chosen people and that Christians must stand with Jews, the chosen people, no matter what context, or else they are being bad Christians. This has been beaten into an entire generation of Protestants, and this is why it's impossible to do any sort of criticism on the right of Israel in mainstream politics.
And I think that, just to be clear, it's also a mainline Democrat position at this point as well, which any time that both the right and the left, the Republicans and Democrat, the establishment portions of them agree on something is always a reason to raise your eyebrow. I remember when Trump bombed Syria, that was the first time you could turn on CNN and they were like, finally, Trump looks presidential. Finally, he's a neocon bombing countries around the world. We could be proud of him now. I think there's also a little more. I agree with what Andrew said. But I'll say one caveat. There's a little more too, though. I think that it's the worst kept secret in the world that the United States, while signing non-proliferation treaties, actually gifted Israel nuclear weapons. And there's this sort of, it's very similar to the Ukraine situation where there's this corruption that's gone on behind the screen between the establishment United States government and Israel for so long that there's now this symbiotic relationship where the warmongers, the military industrial complex, they have to go all in and keep this perpetual fire going on in the Middle East. I will say, as a brief caveat, that does not mean Palestine's awesome. It doesn't mean Israel's always wrong 100% of the time. I'm not saying anything like that, but certainly it seems with large portions of the Republican Party and some of the Democrat, it's a death knell for your political career to want to criticize Israel.
I can't believe we're seeing it real time, but this is horseshoe theory in effect.
Crazy.
Rob, could I really quickly ask you? Do you think that you said that it's to some degree a president in the Democratic Party? Would you probably agree that it's more common in the Republican Party given the link to evangelicalism and Zionism?
Yes, I do think that. And I think, though, that this is one of the things that's so troubling. I'm not a leftist. I don't like lefties, but I was sort of a Ron Paul, sort of a libertarian-esque Republican. And one of the things when I entered college, because I'm an old man, so when I was in college in 2003, 2004, I was highly skeptical of the Iraq war. So I had all these lefties in the debate community that were like, well, we can tolerate Rob's anti-war message. It's the economic shit we don't like. Now, most of those people, though, are pro-war. Most of my lefty friends, all it took was Obama continuing George Bush's policies and Orange Man suggesting that the intel agencies were bad, and all of a sudden they're all in on pro-war. So there is certainly a neoliberal string of the Democratic Party that's absolutely in tow with not just Israel, but any of the defense contractors, sort of the Bill Kristols, the, John Bolton, defend Israel at all costs. Any war in the Middle East is a good war. But yeah, that's obviously with the religion aspect, I think it is more prevalent in the Republican Party.
Let me ask you this on your side, guys, on the lefty side. We see in the Twitch political sphere and in online politics, as a mainstream that socialists and especially hardline communists seem to be very anti-Israel and very anti-Zionism. And they seem to only cloak that under the guise of being anti-Israel, destroying Palestine, or being merciless to Palestine. But don't you think that there's another underlying tone there, and they're just afraid to say that we ought to be able to criticize Israel and Israeli politics and Jewish politics? That's okay to do.
Well, I don't think that Israeli politics or Jewish politics. I think there's a massive distinction to be made there. I think that Zionism is fundamentally anti-Jewish. I think that Zionism is probably the worst thing for the Jewish people I can imagine. But if we want to see,
well, can you tell me what you think?
Underlying, I've got an audio issue. Let me take my headphones off and back on again. That seems to be fixing it.
No problem. I was just wondering if you guys can tell us what you consider Zionism to be.
I consider Zionism to just be like an ethno-nationalism for Jewish people. So ethno-nationalism for Jewish people, having a Jewish state in the Middle East, having Israel as that state would be a common aspect of it. But if somebody wanted Madagascar,
it expansionary.
Every time I talk, it cuts my audio out. Let me fix that. Let me figure out what's going on with that.
Okay.
I've got you loud and clear over here.
Yeah,
I've got you loud and clear.
Headphones, speaker audio.
Okay.
I can hear you guys when I take it off and back on again. I think it's some automatic feature of the Bluetooth headphones or something.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I was just wondering, do you think it's expansionary?
Yeah.
Do you think that Zionism is expansionary, meaning it's not just going to stop with an ethno-state, but it's trying to move outward, trying to expand, in other words? That seems to be what the problem is that it's expansionary.
I can imagine it being expansionary, but I'm not... Oh, sorry, Bunk, you go ahead.
No, it's totally cool. I don't necessarily know if it's going to be expansionary by definition. I can imagine some people would defend that position. I believe Zionism just definitionally would be like, oh yeah, the idea that because of their persecution, Jewish people deserve some kind of ethno-state.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, does anyone agree with this? I think that sometimes obviously we go too far with the crazy white nationals and the name-ems and all that stuff, which is horseshit. But I also think we go too far with people that aren't that fringe. For example, when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, right? And the argument was, well, you can't do that or a bunch of people will get mad and launch rockets. Well, fuck them. That's on them then. Like, I don't have a problem looking at a state that says this is where we want our embassy to be. This is our capital city. I might have disagreements with how the state was formed or how the state, but like, let's not pretend that the other side's good. And so it seems these battle lines are drawn where it's just oversimplified. And it's like, if I'm pro-Israel, I'm always pro-Israel. And if I'm anti-Israel, I'm always anti-Israel. And I think that all sides have been very shitty as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there's a lot of money in lobbying that goes on from that extension to Democrats and Republicans both. So the thing is I think that all of us, once again, horseshoe theory in effect, would probably agree that Zionism bad and criticism of Israel fine, right? Yep. Both of these things are okay from both perspectives. And I think that the driving force behind that is because it's been taboo for many, many years, especially due to the evangelical arm, the Billy Graham arm, which was bribed by Israelis with lots and lots of money to be very, very pro-Israel. And it kind of hoodwinked a whole generation of evangelicals into this absurd idea of your support of Israel means you're a good Christian, and that's just silly.
I shit you not, I went to a Pentecostal church when I was 16, and they firmly believed that we needed to defend Israel because in Revelations it said once there was a big enough war there, it would be the rapture. And like, they believed that shit hook, line, and sinker. They actually wanted a war in the Middle East because they thought that would bring on the rapture. And I mean,
that's actually really weird that you're saying that. I was raised the exact same way.
Yeah, it's part of Revelation. Yeah, it's part of Revelation.
Verbatim. That until the last of the chosen, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's how I was raised too.
It's wrong.
It was that like well, that's not part of the debate, but you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
But it was part of the 144,000 of the was it 12 tribes of Benjamin? Or 9, I forget what it was, until the last Jew returns to Israel. Then, so the same thing. It's weird because I literally have never heard anybody ever espouse that same belief, whether you believe it or not. But that's exactly how I was raised. Interesting, you said that.
Yeah, it's part of this evangelicalism, which spawned up, especially in the late 80s and all through the 90s. There was all kinds of things like prosperity doctrine, prosperity gospel. All sorts of things that were fundamentally anti-Christian that were beaten into the general public because the understanding of actual Christianity in the United States is vague at best at this point. It's very vague. People don't really understand the religion very well.
And one of the things.
The approach.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Just thanks. The approach, with like the approach towards revelations, and what it seems like the mainstream American Christian culture seems to be like almost bordering on a death cult. It was kind of what I wanted to know if Andrew thought the same thing.
Yeah, well, to them, it's a sexy message, right?
No.
Like that's all the post-apocalyptic movies, all of that stuff come out of the idea of revelation, in fact. And it was made popularized by Hollywood as well, which, as we know, has a lot of Zionist influence in it. Okay,
And we're banned. We're banned.
Listen, I'm just saying.
Like Dave Chappelle said, I'm not saying, but I'm saying there's a lot of Jews.
Yeah, hey, where's Ye? Get Nick on.
Well, I mean, look,
Tell you about
it is
When
true.
it's a bunch of Jewish people, it's a coincidence that we don't talk about it.
Right. Well, I mean,
Whoa! Crazy
it is.
bump.
I'm
It
saying
is true.
coincidence.
There's a lot of money.
I disavow.
Yeah, there is a lot of money that flows through Hollywood, and a lot of that does have definitely Israeli roots. Hollywood's a fantastic propaganda arm, and lots of nations, not just Israel, love to get their money in there for their own propaganda. I don't think anybody would dispute that either. So this issue that we have is that, yes, Synth is right, that they kind of made this post-apocalyptic sexy message. In fact, you'll note that there's a huge ton of movies that came out which were also Israeli backed, called Left Behind, a massive series, and that had a lot of money behind it with Kirk Cameron and this kind of thing, which made that even a more popular message. So.
And here, let me say this, right? Like, if you're on the right, so this isn't for Synth and Bunk and their audience, but if you're on the right, like, think of how ridiculous this sort of makes some people. So take the Daily Wire, right? And Ben Shapiro, right? Facts don't care about your feelings. Yet this guy flies off the fucking handle anytime anyone criticizes a Jewish person. I have no dislike for Jewish people or any ethnicity. I'm merely saying that we should try to treat all people the same. People shouldn't be off limits because of a particular ethnicity or religion. But not to Ben Shapiro. So much so that someone I used to read their books, Jordan Peterson, he goes to the Daily Wire, and what's he saying now? The guy that said before you change the world, clean your room. What's he saying this week? We need regime change in Iran. That's what we need to do. That's Canadian Jordan Peterson going to work for Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire and immediately calling for the U.S. military to overthrow the government of Iran. Now, I have no love for the government of Iran either, but you could see sort of the weird twisting that it makes these people. Or how many conservatives do you know that were, they don't have shit all to say, or Democrats as well, they don't have shit all to say about securing our border or illegal immigration or stopping, sending money to Ukraine. But my goodness, when it comes to the border of Israel, we got to protect that come hell or high water. So it's one of those issues. Again, I can't stress this enough. We are focusing a lot on the right wing, and it's certainly true on the right. But let's not kid ourselves. The reason this is so insipid is because there are so many people in the mainstream left that go right along with this shit.
Yeah, to add on to that, part of the argument maybe for our lefty panelists here is I think that it's the social justice aspect of creating a taboo around poking fun at Jewish people, even though it's funny to do. And Jews themselves used to do it a lot.
Yep.
Mel Brooks was a person who was not going to run away from poking fun at Jewish people. It's there's nothing inherently wrong with doing it any more than you would make fun of anybody else. And I think that the social taboo, while the right had something to do with it, evangelicals, I think that plays into the SJW aspect of thou shalt not touch race, gender, sex, anything like this, as far as making fun of it. And that has created an even further stigma, I think, against Jews than anything making fun of them would have done.
Mm-hmm. I think that a large part as well of the stigma around criticizing Israel specifically, not so much as making fun of Jews, is that you'll have a lot of people who will criticize Israel, but then whenever you mine further into their position, it's actually it's kind of based in anti-Semitism. When you have so many people who are so vocally anti-Semitic criticizing Israel, to kind of join in with them feels really bad. It feels like you could be mistaken for one of them, right?
That actually makes
hard to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't really argue with that because it's true.
Seeing that we're all in agreement on this one, I'm going to go ahead and interject myself. I promised I wouldn't, but y'all aren't disagreeing on anything I'm throwing at you, which is really uninteresting to me. But I like how Bunk put that. That's 100% accurate because for me, a lot of that seeing on social media and stuff was any criticism of Israel was generally rooted in anti-Semitism. But then along came this idea of actual nationalism within America to say, wait a minute, why are we paying so much in foreign aid to Israel? And then people were like, well, then people like Ben Shapiro come on the scene. It's like, well, we're not going to criticize the Jews no matter what. It's like, really, all you're doing right now is causing more anti-Semitism by trying to deflect away when you can criticize Israel as a nation, as a government, as an entity saying, look, why are you getting this? But Bunk's dead on the money with that, to where it's like now the anti-Semites have joined so closely with that. It's like, look, it's not that I hate Jews, but it's like, I don't want to support the Iranians either. I don't want to support the Jews either. It's not, I want to support America. So I get that. And it makes sense. And I'm glad people are actually finally saying that and seeing that, especially our friends on the left.
Well,
Yeah,
okay, but these aren't typical leftists, John.
No, they're
you know.
They didn't announce their political alignment, so you two keep calling them lefties.
No, they're so far left
They're on the
that
left.
that they almost are going to jump off to the right. That's how
Far right, so to jump back to the left.
Well, we're not going to the left. But no, I'll just say
Soon, come home.
like it just like I hate to put it this way, but it just takes, you just have to have courage, or just to say fuck you. I'm not, it's difficult. I know I could say this about Andrew. I'm sure the same's true of Bunk and Synth, right? Because I kind of know who they are a little. I've debated white nationalist or white nationalist adjacent people. I know Andrew has as well. I don't disagree with a lot of what they say. There's clearly a war against white people or Christians or men or straight people and all of that stuff. And there's clearly this, you can't say anything about Jewish people. And clearly there are Jewish people in positions of power that use that to their benefit, whether it be terrible people in Hollywood that want to, oh, you can't criticize me for my sexual exploits because I'm Jewish. That's anti-Semitism. Or you can't criticize AIPAC because that's anti-Semitism. So it's okay to take those positions and say that's right. But the white supremacists and the anti-Semites, they jump the fucking rails when they say, well, what's the solution? Well, we hate all Jewish people. Well, we want an ethno-state. And so it's the way to end this is to say we're not going to be shamed into saying that we can't criticize people because of certain characteristics, but we're also going to tell the people, fuck you, that try to say, yeah, we agree with you, therefore X. And you just have to take that position and say, the more people say, and you could see it now with other groups, you can't criticize trans people, you can't criticize black people. Well, the same sort of bullshit and the sort of excesses and the corruption that come from not being able to criticize Jewish people, that's just going to pop up in all those other groups. So this is a reason to stop that identity politics stuff and to call it out when you see it occurring.
Well, you said something there. I agree with the core message of dropping the identity politics stuff. But you said that you thought there was a war against white people. Do you think there's a war against black people as well?
There is certainly people in this country that dislike white people, black people, and use those things. But the people in positions of power in our institution that really are movers and shakers that create the narrative and policies certainly go one direction on this. And they're certainly anti-white.
Well, I agree they go one direction on this. I don't think I agree that they're certainly anti-white. It seems like there's some aspects through which people are anti-white, and there are some aspects through which people are anti-black. And if you look at it on net, it seems like the people who are the most disadvantaged by the existing socioeconomic systems usually end up being black people on average.
Okay, let's take an institution. Let's take academia. Can you give me an example of any area in academia, K through 12 or secondary education, where you could criticize blackness? You could talk about the problems of blackness and things like that.
No, I agree. There's going to be some things that are dissimilar and some things that are not.
Okay, now let's do the entertainment.
Hold on, let him answer, Rob. Let him answer, Rob.
Yeah, what I was going to say is just that I agree with you that there are like non-symmetric aspects here. There are things that are like specific to ways that you have like discrimination towards white people. But there are also ways you have the sort of asymmetric discrimination towards black people. If you take a look at hiring practices, right, what we see is that the people who are the least likely to get hired based on the basis of things like names that like look black or that are more often black, or based on other factors that might indicate that somebody's black, seem to generally correlate with disproportionately low hiring. You also see this in terms of like just socioeconomics generally. If you look at like inequality or like wealth or like income by family.
That's not true. So the name study's bullshit, because if you look at those studies, what they did was this. They'd say, if someone named John who's white applies for a job, and someone named Shaniqua who's black applies for the job, Shaniqua's less likely to get a callback. First off, these studies are older. And secondly, that's probably more to do with the fact that it is an unusual sounding name. Like, for example, if you said a black man named John and a white man named Bubba, do you think Bubba would get the call back? Because they're like, oh, Bubba, he must be white. Do you think? Of course not. It's because people assume that people with names that they consider lower class like that probably are coming from a family that wouldn't be as good of employees. And that might be true when it comes to the lower level, but when it comes to upper level, like, you can't deny, Synth, every major Fortune 500 company in this country would love to have people of color in positions. If it's true that there's this, it goes both ways, why don't we see any people of color identifying as white? But you see litanies of people, including Asians Americans, constantly as identifying as people of color when it comes to applying to Ivy League schools, when it comes to applying for these good jobs at Fortune 500 companies.
Do you think one example, like, do you think Jamal Jones would be a strange name or a weird name?
No, that seems
Bunk, if you have something to add, feel free. Guys, if you have something to add, put your hand up and I'll call on you.
That was the male name used in the discrimination study.
Which one? There's been like 10.
Hold on, I couldn't hear you. Say it again.
There's been like 10. There wasn't just one.
Bunk's got his hand up. Go ahead, Bunk.
Study, I agree, but I don't think that I don't think it's the case that weirdness of the names is what you could say is responsible there, because they control out for it by using a bunch of normal names that are still stereotypically considered black and a bunch of normal names that are considered white in a lot of these studies, and they still see the same kind of results. Sorry, go ahead, Bunk.
Oh yeah, another thing that you said during your what do you call it? Your points that you made. You said that these are like lower sounding like names, like lower class sounding names. Well, yeah, because we can have a large association between black people names and being lower class, because black people are disproportionately lower class. That would be a point in Synth's favor, I would say.
Okay, Bubba.
What about Bubba?
Is that a white sounding name or a black sounding name?
Sounds probably white leaning. I'd assume white.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that if we did that study and included the name Bubba, would we say, see, white people tend to be lower class, that's why there's negative association with the name Bubba?
No, I think that when you take a look at names like, sorry, go ahead, Monk.
Oh yeah, well, lower class white people are going to be named Bubba more often. But whenever we take a look at like what makes somebody's name lower class, well, we can take a look at the what do you call it, the distribution of the lower class and what makes up the given lower class. It would actually be a very weak explanation, I think, if you were to say, oh yeah, white people are disproportionately lower class and therefore the name Bubba is seen as a lower class name.
No, but the point is that
better
the type
mechanism behind that.
The type of name that speaks specifically to an ethnicity. Now, I don't think the name Jamal is necessarily that. I was reading the study I read the last time I debated this was a year and a half ago, and the names they used were names like Shaniqua and, Cinnamon and shit like that, which sounds like stripper names. But again, these studies were older anyways, and I'm sorry, it just doesn't line up, at least when you're talking about jobs that people are really stretching for. I mean, this idea that like we have to ignore the reality that we all see in front of us because someone did a study and said Jamal didn't get called back, but Larry did. I just don't buy it, because everybody, name me the company, like the company I work for right now, I guarantee they'd crawl over broken glass.
This also, I feel like, is beside the point, because it doesn't really speak to institutional discrimination.
Right.
It speaks to possibly a racial conscious bias that happens in the general public, which could be attributed to 100 different factors, as well as history, blah, 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 blah. But when he's talking specifically, Rob gave an example of an institution which is critical in the United States, college and K through 12, and said, look, do you really think that we could discuss anti-whiteness and things like that in these institutions? Yeah, absolutely. You guys would agree that's true. What about anti-blackness? What about blackness being bad in any degree? What about the fact that hip-hop culture maybe is disgusting or things like this? Can we have any of those open forum discussions in these critical institutions? The answer is no. So, gotcha, deferring to hiring practices may, I think we can even bite the bullet and say, sure, even if that's true. I just think it's kind of beside the point.
Well, I think it's perfectly.
Hold on. Bunk had his hand up.
Something like institutional discrimination, it seems like it's the case that if you're discriminating based on hiring, that seems institutional to me. Maybe if by institution you just mean when laws are explicitly in place. I think that we'd have a completely different conversation, but I don't think it matters much if the law is explicit or implicit. I think if there's an implicit structure of a system that makes some people worse off than others, I think that's still worth fixing.
Let's go down to Bunk.
You suck so much dick. You literally, that was exactly what I was going to say, but I had my hand raised like a good little boy and you just fucking cut in.
Yeah, but I mean, but who cares? If we're talking about government corrected institutions, we're talking about things like universities, if we're talking about government hiring practices, if we're talking about the FBI and the NSA and the CIA and every type of government institution that's out there, or institution which controls our daily lives, I would say that the practice of anti-whiteness is much more conscious in those institutions. If you're talking about the hiring practices of random companies, for instance, in those studies, can I ask you something? Is there a reference there in hiring practices from big Fortune 500 companies, or are these smaller companies?
I'm not really sure. These companies used are, I think, are going to be random selection, which means they
Yeah.
on average should be smaller.
So but wouldn't you agree that in some of these Fortune 500 companies, which go out of their way to make all of the mixed race propaganda for messaging, often because they think that as whites are coming into a minority, they're going to sell more product by trying to, push the product towards people of color, that type of thing. Don't you think that they go out of their way to make sure that their hiring practices are unbiased?
No, not really. I don't see a good reason to think to indicate why they would go out of their way to make sure
because they make
hiring practices are less biased. But I think what's important is not whether or not the hiring practices are less, whether or not they're actively trying to make sure they're less biased. But I think what's important is how that exists overall in the system as a whole, not just in these top Fortune 500 companies.
If I may, the irony is they're not trying to be unbiased.
All right, real quick, gentlemen, we're gonna have to go into hand up raising because now we got a lot of people in the discussion. So from now on, let's go ahead and hand raise, and I'll call in your order. Rob, then we'll go down to Bunk.
Okay. They're not trying to be unbiased. That when it comes to bigger name companies and anyone that the public's looking at, they want people of color and they want minorities. I'll give you two examples real quick. One, I applied for a grant where I bought my first house a while ago because we had to tap into a sewage line because we had a septic tank. They were putting public water in. The grant for the township was declined at the last minute because the bids they had to take from the digging, none of it was offered to people of color, companies that were owned by people of color. Now, this is despite the fact that there is no people of color that own digging companies within 150 miles of where this town was. But nonetheless, the bid had to be offered out to at least one company owned by a person of color. The same is true of a friend of mine that works at a government defense contractor. They have gone through the order that by 2030, 50% of their employees in this tech sector have to be women or people of color. So they're actively, and you see this all through governmental agencies and Fortune 500 companies where they can't wait. Again, you can't show me one prominent person that we've ever seen pretending to be a white person so that they could get hired at one of these great companies. I'm not declining that there could be people that run a small mom and pop convenience store that didn't want to hire Jamal and instead wanted to hire Benji or some shit. But what I'm saying is we're denying reality. And the greater point I'll just say real quick is this is one small thing. The irony is that actually a lot of this shit is negative and racist towards black people because this bigotry of low expectations and trying to say you're always the victim actually is in itself a form of racism that's very insidious. But every major institution, whether it be the academic institutions, the entertainment institutions, our media, our policies, every single one of them push the narrative of anti-whiteness. It's okay to criticize white people. It's okay to say that you're skeptical of anything white people do. But if it's a person of color, just like a Jewish person, and you have anything negative to say, you could be accused of racism.
Down to Bunk.
Yeah, so I think an important thing to point out whenever we're having this conversation is, at least this is where the conversation started, we were talking about people who have power. I think that almost whenever we limit to like, oh yeah, let's look at the 500 companies, or let's look at only institutions, only things like the academic institutions, for example, we're kind of limiting our scope within a given society. We're talking about like the societal war on white people, for example. I think it's important to take into context all the other different types of people who will have power, the ways that power is implemented, and the outcomes that you'll see because of that. I guess I'll pass it down to Synth because Synth seems to want to have to say something, but yeah.
Go ahead, Synth.
Sure. So there are a couple of important things to mention here. One is that the majority of businesses in the U.S. are not Fortune 500. The top 500 companies are what makes up the Fortune 500. The vast majority of them are actually small businesses. So if the practices, the hiring practices, end up being discriminatory at small businesses, that's not going to be minor to the average American. That's going to be pretty massive to them. But you could say like it's not intentional, right? And that affirmative action is intentional. But if you end up undercutting that by saying that you think affirmative action is negative for black people, which I would agree, I think affirmative action does end up being negative for black people and for white people. It doesn't seem to be a good way to make a case for. It doesn't seem to be a good way to make a case for war on white people. If it's the case, it's damaging to both races. Or both major races in the U.S.
We don't need to make the case. If the case is that if we're talking about actual institutions that have real power and authority over policy making, they're going to influence policymakers. They're making the next generation of policymakers. They are the ones who influence all the think tanks, where the rhetoric's going to go forward. This is not
Gotcha, Rob.
Uncle Jim Bob's tire shop down the road that's doing that. These are major academic institutions which are pushing out these think tank programs, and they're funding them. And these are the same people who are putting out the next generation of politicians. This is real institutional power. And he's asked him, I don't know how many times now, can you give us an example of these institutions that you think would in any way put out any anti-POC rhetoric the same way that they are anti-white rhetoric? And I think your answer is no.
There is none. And if
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll leave you after this.
Let's go. Rob, do you mind passing over to Synth, or because Synth wants to respond? All right, we'll do Synth, then over to Rob. Synth, go ahead.
Sure. I don't think we have to name an example of a large-scale public institution or a large-scale semi-public institution to make the case that there is racism against black people, just like there's racism against white people.
Yeah, but we're not talking about whether or not there's racism against black people. We'll concede that this is true. We're talking about whether or not institutional powers have an anti-white narrative. And if there's an anti-white narrative being pushed across the board, there's lots and lots of racist people across the board, including black people who can be very racist. Nobody's disputing that this is true, but whether or not if there is an actual push towards anti-white narratives in the mainstream, and I think that we can point to Hollywood, institutions, and pretty much every single major Fortune 500 company, everything that you can point to that has the most direct influence on people's general lives. It's more than fine to go for anti-white narratives. They don't do anything for an anti-narrative towards LGBTQ or POC, period.
Well, I think
right, and it was like I wonder if we'll make the same
month.
argument then when it comes to Jewish people, right? Like, because that's what the topic was. So will they say the same thing? Like, oh well, Jewish sounding names are less likely to get called back and shit as well. No, we're talking specifically about the fact that all of these narratives and all of these institutions, again, we've named them: the entertainment industry, academia, the mainstream media, the tech companies, the politicians. Like, I could name you political policies right now. Let me just ask you real quick. If I was debating someone talking about systemic racism, and I said, sure, reparations for people that were slaves, but other than that, what's the next thing that people that talk about systemic racism always say? Well, it wasn't just slavery. As recently as the 60s, we had the practice of, go ahead.
I'm not sure which one you're segregation.
Redlining. Did you know that
Redlining?
Wells Fargo just came out last month and said they'll no longer give mortgages to white people? Did you know that? Isn't that redlining against white people? Does that mean that
That's pretty bad. But Rob, the dispute is not over like whether or not bad things happen to white people. The dispute is on whether or not it's worse for black people than for white people.
No, the dispute is this. Okay. No one's saying that there isn't racism against black people. What we're saying is that the racism that occurs against white people, this got started because I said there is a war in these institutions against whiteness. That's absolutely true. So nothing you're saying disputes that. And it is true that the people in charge
wouldn't think there's a war against black people.
No, I would in a different way, right? It's the vocal. Let me explain real quick, right? To what I'm saying, right? Like, they don't give a shit. The people that run these institutions, they don't give a shit about white people, black people. They don't care about any of them. What they've realized is they're able to use the vocalizations and this sort of ideology of the left to cause a division, to play this identity politics. And right now, because the left has won the culture war, that all of these groups that they consider as oppressors through their bullshit cultural Marxism, white people, straight people, Christians, men, etc., that it's okay to physically or verbally attack them, to instruct people in all of these institutions that there's something wrong with those people because they're oppressors, and to go a step further, have actual policies that target those people. I'll give you another policy. Did you know when the CDC first came out with the vaccine that they said was going to be really helpful? They said that we shouldn't give it to elderly people before crucial workers because there were more black people that were crucial workers. So we had to save black lives before white lives. That's what they said. We had specific loans or specific grants that were going to be given.
Did you cite me that? The CDC thing you're talking about?
We had specific grants that were going to be given to poor black farmers. We have reparations in cities like San Francisco that are going to be given to $5 million to black people. This shit is insane. The attacks on whiteness and again, give me one example of a prominent person. Give me one example of a prominent person ever pretending to be white. Go ahead. For a job, for any sort of clout. I'll take one example.
The idea that there's discrimination against white people on the basis of the fact that there's affirmative action doesn't really seem to, or sorry, on the basis of the fact that there are reparations that are given out for Black people, doesn't seem to make much sense given that all the goal behind, or the ethic behind reparations, even though I don't agree with it, is one that can be made in I think a totally race neutral way. Just there are people who have their ancestors for some reason, or like some generation before them, they've been made poorly off because of something that was done to them that was unjust. And therefore, like whoever the people are who are discriminated against in the past, the people who are now in worse off conditions because of that past discrimination should have something given to them. I don't think that's the kind of thing that you have to make in a sort of like racialized way. I think it's the kind of thing you can make in a race neutral way, and still get support for reparations. You can even specify based on class. But the CDC claim, I don't think it's the case that the CDC said that about in regards to the reason why is because of the fact that Black people are more often essential workers. I think that's just the fact that like they probably mentioned race in passing. If they did, I'll concede that point. But I don't think this is the case. I think the point of being able to specialize, or being able to specifically target people for the vaccine who are specifically targeting for the vaccine people who are crucial workers versus people who are elderly. It's just a matter of we have to make sure the country continues to function while we're giving out vaccines to people.
Now, I sent you the link. It's in the Discord.
Hold on, let's kick it down to Andrew real quick.
Yeah, just to send that. I noticed you're still having the audio issue. Mm-hmm. I think that's a Discord setting. Someone DM'd me and said, tell Synth to check his Discord setting on your actual audio. You might have it set to some type of cutout when you're talking.
Oh, like doesn't it have the microphone?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Gateway.
I don't know exactly what the setting is. I just asked for clarification.
I know what you're talking about, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe that would be helpful.
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, up to you, Rob.
I'll show you.
Okay.
All right.
Yep.
Let me share the screen. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Oh, yep, I can. That's nice.
Where is it?
Okay.
There we
So
go.
you guys see this? So this is on page 31 of the CDC's proposed. This was early in the vaccine push, but they're trying to decide who they're going to give it to. Now, look at essential workers, that's group 1, adults with high-risk medical condition, that's group 2, and adults over 65 or age 3. Now, you can go up and read these slides previously, and it does mention that they will save lives. More lives would be saved if we gave it to the adults over the age of 65. But here you can see what the crucial factor is for their decision. The bright green means that's a good thing, and you see where it says mitigate health inequities, it says racial and ethnic minority groups disproportionately represented in essential industries. In other words, that's good. More minorities will get the vaccine if we give it to this group. And then look at this bright red section here on the right for the group over 65. Racial and ethnic groups underrepresented among groups in 65. And surprise, surprise, you know what they ended up deciding? You know what the CDC's guidance was? Let's give it to the group that will save less lives because it's more fair for equity, because it will benefit more minorities.
Wait, that's not what your source says at all here. What your source is just saying
is exactly what it says.
Here's a point in favor of an ethical principle, which on the basis of that ethical principle would be better for this than the other ones. It's not the case that your source is saying anything about this is the sole reason why we made that decision. That seems like a wild.
If you go down, do you see the slide that I'm at now? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's the 3 factors that they use: science, implementation, and ethics. With science, adults, they said all 3 were equal, though if you go and look at those slides, they say the science shows that it'll save more lives if it's adults over 65 given. Implementation, they rate adults over the age of 65 would be best because they would be easier to get the vaccine to, because most of them are in facilities that are easier and they'd be more willing. However, on ethics, which the ethics portion of it was driven by promoting justice and mitigating health inequities, that's 3 stars for the essential workers and only 1 star. So yes, that according to the CDC, they said by every metric, we would have saved more lives, and it would.
Like, once again, it just doesn't follow.
It's not a non sequitur. Let me explain to you. There were 3. Please let me finish. They had 3 criteria for who to give it to. In 2 of the 3 criteria, they said people over the age of 65. The 3rd criteria, the only justification was more minorities would get it if we give it to this group, and that was the reason they decided, okay, we'll give it to that group. It clearly says it.
So it's not the case that the argument here you're making actually follows, or the conclusion of the follows the premises, basically. So if you're saying that it's the case that, like, because of the fact that race was a consideration, and the fact that race is an ethical consideration, and ethics was the primary factor for the consideration, because it's the biggest difference here on their pluses and their pluses graph. if that's the argument you're giving, it still is not going to follow to your conclusion, which is that race is the sole reason why they made the decision. It seems like there are other reasons they made the decision. Race was like a part of the decision-making process, as in like understanding there's a discrimination, there's people who are like pretty worse off, and making sure that we don't like disproportionately impact these people negatively, right? Is something that we should take into account. That's not going to be the same as making the decision on the basis.
No, it's worse.
Big difference.
It's actually worse, because if they said the only factor we're going to determine is race, that would be bad. But if they say, well, we're going to look at health and implementation, and in both of that, this older group gets them, but we're also going to look at race, and in that, it's the essential workers. So now they're saying it's not just race, it's we'll look at other things. We'll say that lives would be saved, but there's not enough black people that would get it. So we weigh equity and promoting justice of giving it to black people more. Like, that's insane. If this chart would have been the opposite way, if this chart would have said, well, more lives will be saved by giving it to this group, but there's too many black people in that group. Like, everyone would have rightly said, this is insane. This is racism. Now, it doesn't matter what you actually think about the vaccine. It's irrelevant. What I'm saying is these institutions would never have the hair on their ass to put forth shit like this that were critical of black people or suggesting black people get less or something like this. But this is commonplace in our institutions now, both verbally and through policy, to attack white people. You could do the same with straight people. You could do the same with men. Like, the point is, all of these institutions are, and I'm telling you right now, it's not that they give a shit about black people. They don't care. They're just saying it because they think that it helps them consolidate power right now.
All right, let's kick it down to Andrew.
All right, and then also onto the idea of the ethical principle. How did they determine that this was an ethical principle? Except that they were looking through it through a lens of racial bias to begin with. And this is how they come up with this ethical principle. I didn't agree to this ethical principle. You didn't agree with the ethical principle. They arbitrarily came up with the ethical principle and considered the racial bias themselves, which shows that they're looking through this through their own prism of a racial lens. And they themselves believe that this is some high form of ethic. It's ridiculous on its face, because what they're doing is that it is anti-white discriminatory practice to go into Rob's favor. It has to be. And their ethical principle seems to be promoting that, Sent.
All right, let's kick it over to Sent.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. What do you say, John?
Did you kick it over to you? Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So the argument that Rob was making was that it was solely on the basis of this, just doesn't end up aligning with the facts. This is usually the kind of thing that you get out of people who are like, quote the CDC as saying something that would otherwise be like horrendous optics. Like, oh, I only care about like giving the vaccine to black people or something. It ends up usually being the case that that's not actually what the CDC says. So the argument that like that because of the fact that there is a it seems like now Rob is willing to grant the idea that there is there's racism against both black people and white people. The argument that because of the fact that there are like institutions who are being racist, this is somehow like it counts more in favor of racism or something. I don't think that's true. I think that if somebody's racially biased or racially motivated on an individual level, I think that as long as there's enough individuals who are racially motivated and racially biased, you end up manifesting institutional discrimination. You end up making things that are not explicitly coded in the institutions, implicitly coded in institutions. So, for example, you end up having things like a hiring discrimination practice. You end up having things like when it comes to like some forms of force, police hesitation are going to be more likely on one race than the other. So if you see in the case of like lethal force, you see white people are more likely to be hesitated against, black people are more likely to be hesitated against. With non-lethal force, you see that it's like way more often going to be used on black people. Or you see things like when black people are driving and it's after dark and you can't see their skin color. You see differences in racial disparities. You see like a lot of things which are due to people's implicit biases, people's own internalized racism that end up manifesting in a way that's sort of systemic and institutional. So, sorry, John, are you trying to speak?
Just 10 seconds, White. When I do the hands, like 10 seconds. I'm only
Okay,
going to do
thank
that
you.
if somebody else raised their hands to speak in queue. Right now, Bunk is. So let's go ahead and kick it down to Bunk.
Oh, yeah, no, another reason that this could be the case, not necessarily because they have some kind of anti-white bias, but looking at the data here that I have in front of me, it's actually the case that people who make up these ethnic minorities are actually more likely to have more severe, more severe encounters with the coronavirus due to probably the distrust of given associations and given actual government entities due to their past with them, the cultural, the cultural effect that it has past generations. It totally makes sense that they would factor this in, at least to some degree, in my mind. I don't think this is a ploy against white people, some grand scheme. It just seems to be going to take into account the data that we actually have.
So look
That's
at
funny.
how you smuggle this in. Look how you smuggle this in. You smuggle in the grand conspiracy against White people, we didn't say it was a grand conspiracy against white people from the CDC.
Well,
We said it gives you one more piece of a larger puzzle, which shows a narrative of anti-white bias. You're smuggling in the language because you're a rotten leftist and you don't know how to do anything
Easy.
Wait, so if it was the case that the CDC was directly
Gotcha, Rob.
discriminating against white people, and we're not saying that that was like their main motivation, if that was the case, that would be a conspiracy. That would be a conspiracy against white people. It seems that that's a direct, like, down root from what you're
I'm
claiming.
not
That's
saying it's a
describing-
conspiracy. We didn't say it's a conspiracy.
Yeah,
We're
you
saying
didn't
that
say
the
it, you
lens,
described
the
a
lens
conspiracy.
that they're looking through is biased against white people. That's what we're saying. That's not a conspiracy. Bunk. Is that a conspiracy, Bunk, to say that,
It
Bunk?
would be a conspiracy to say that the institutions are currently having a war on white people.
Very
Yes, that
simple
would be.
question. One more time. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. If I say this person's bias, he's looking through it through a biased lens that's biased against white people, is that a conspiracy, Bunk?
Is that a conspiracy? No, not for an individual
Okay, thank
person.
you.
Conspiracies
Thank you.
necessarily happen within institutions.
All right, let's
What
kick
does
it
that
up to
have to do
Rob.
with anything?
Let's go to Rob.
Because it can't be a conspiracy
Again-
definitionally. You gave me an example where it can't be a conspiracy.
So there's a couple things to say. I want to get to
You're not
this.
talking about an
point that Bunk
individual
said
person
first.
having a bias. You're talking about
Please,
institutions,
Bunk.
large institutions.
Okay, right. So first off, Bunk said something that was very interesting. He said, well, the reason they were looking to give it to black people because black people are distrusting of the health institutions and things like that. Right. That's exactly how we got in this topic in the first place, right? Because we were talking about how we say that you can't criticize Jewish people, and then that makes things worse, right? It makes the racists come out of the woodwork because they say that there's all these institutions and we can't criticize them and they're in positions of power and stuff like that. And I said, we separate ourselves from those assholes, but we do understand that there are certain things that those people are right about. And they are right that there is attacks from these institutions on white people. That's absolutely true. The fact that a bunch of black people would be distrusting of the pharmaceutical companies is because all of these institutions, particularly on the left, have been telling them for fucking decades how systemically racist the pharmaceutical company and all of these government agencies are. So you tell them for years and years, please, let me finish, Monk. You tell them for years and years, the pharmaceutical companies, it's all systemic racism against you. The whole country's systemic racism. Now, please take our medication or you're not allowed to go to work. Pfizer's good now. That's what the left told people of color in this country. And let me say this real quick. The idea that like Synth and Bunk are trying to say, well, the fact that race wasn't the sole factor, it was just the determining factor is nonsense. And if you're in the audience and you're wondering why, just ask yourself this. If there were groups that were predominantly black, let's say, people that work in the healthcare field were predominantly black, and everything the CDC said was, we will save lives if we give this group this. But their determining factor was, but there's too many black people there, so we should give it to this group that's white people. Would anyone here hesitate to say that's racist? I wouldn't. I would say that's fucked up. That seems to say that blackness is something detrimental that the CDC is trying to go against.
Rob, we got to kick you down, Bunk. Bunk, go ahead.
If it was the case that white people were disproportionately less likely to take the vaccine because of societal their distrust of institutions, that would probably be something you'd weigh against. I wouldn't say that was racist at all. Whatever you're talking about, the reason they have the distrust in these institutions is because the left wing points out these institutions have been biased against them. Do you actually think that that's the case? Or do you think it might be the years of discrimination that they faced throughout generations? If your family has been directly discriminated against as soon as like a couple generations ago, of course it's going to have an effect on your trust of those institutions because those are the people who raised you. Everybody on the right likes to talk and preach about how family values are an important thing. I totally agree. You get a lot of your values from your family. Having a strong family household are going to be things that widely affect you. So why are we so willing to hand wave this away whenever it comes to black people and the biases that they've faced throughout the time that they've existed within our country?
Gotcha, Rob. All right, let's kick it over Rob, then to Andrew.
But again, the problem is, I'm not saying you could say that. I'm just saying that there are ramifications of that. If you say that an institution is, quote, systemically racist, the truth is that these things have been wildly blown out of proportion. We see the effects of it when it comes to policing. The truth is that the police, as bad as many of them may be, and there's certainly major problems in this country, they're not out there hunting unarmed black people just for the hell of it. But that's the narrative that gets pushed, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because I wouldn't trust police if I was a black person given that scenario, which means I'm more likely to resist, which means I'm more likely to have an aggressive police officer, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is it's interesting that we talk about the discrimination of the past. These institutions did redlining in the past. These institutions had medical decisions that disproportionately negatively affected black people or specifically went against black people. But now when I say yes, and now that that's changed because they realize, the people in positions of power realize they can play this cultural Marxist game by going after what they consider oppressors like white people, all of a sudden you guys are like, well, it's not that that big of a deal. There's racism against black people too. And what I'm telling you is we're going to see this process repeat itself where people aren't going to have trust of these institutions that fall in these oppressors groups. Christians don't trust them, rightfully so. White people don't trust them, rightfully so. Straight people don't trust them,
Wrap it up,
rightfully
Rob.
so. Because every one of these institutions are actively promoting hatred against these groups.
Kick it over to Andrew, then to Synth, then to Bunk.
This is also typified Spurg narrative building, right? Where it's a form of moral outrage and then quickly build a narrative which makes absolutely no sense. We did not reject that the blacks have experienced all sorts of madness in this country, including the fact we know about the various experiments that were done on them by the government. We understand why there's a distrust factor which exists there. However, there's a distrust factor with other groups as well, namely Christians, who were at the forefront during those lockdowns of pushing back against them through their own model of distrust. They weren't incorporated anywhere in any of this type of modeling. Why? Because the prism of bias is such that the anti-white narrative simply exists there. And what Rob is saying is that this narrative builds. The anti-white narrative builds. We understand that the oppression narrative builds, and that's the narrative you're trying to build. But at some point, it goes too far, Bunk.
Okay.
Hold on, we got to go Synth, then Bunk. I'm just going in order. I'm not. I'm Bunk. Did you didn't have your hand up? I'm sorry. I'm trying to be fair here.
It's how it works. It's
That was
fine.
directed at
Go
Bunk.
Synth, go for it.
You good to sit? You good to switch Synth?
I'm gonna swap with
Bunk down to you, then we'll go to Synth.
Okay. So you said that they're more likely to resist because of the given ways that they are instructed within their given communities, and this is because we're telling them that they're like black people, or what do they call it? Black people are getting hunted by cops. That's not going to be the case. I can acknowledge that it's probably a feedback loop to some degree, but obviously where this feedback loop is going to start is because we've always had these types of racial biases in policing. We have tons of data on this, pages and pages and pages that I can cite to you. This is like obviously the case. We're obviously talking about the past and the ways the past currently inform the ways that we interact within society today. You say that we said it's not that big of a deal because black people face discrimination too. That's not me or Synth's position. I suppose maybe Synth holds that position and would like to come out against what I'm going to say here, but that's a problem. Here's also another problem that we are experiencing. It isn't some wide societal conspiracy to go against white people. What we're showing you is that racial discrimination exists for both white and black people, and it's a problem for both of them. It is in both cases a problem, and it is an issue. Whenever it comes to the distrust of black people institutions, Andrew said that you never rejected the idea that the black people within institutions, or what do you call it, that they are distrusting of them because of the past. But you did, right? Rob Noor's response to me was, well, the reason why they are distrusting is because the left tells them those institutions are biased, to which I rightfully pointed out we have a long history of discrimination against these given individuals.
Gotcha,
I guess Synth can go take it over afterwards. But yeah.
Synth over to you, then to Rob, then to Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think there's anything ethically wrong with going about a strategy for dealing with diseases where you take into account the races of the people because the races have some other correlation. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with that. If Rob had said that from the get-go, I don't think anybody would have an issue with that. But Rob has to present that in a certain way. If he wants to make sure to make it look bad for the left, or look bad for the CDC, or look bad for the vaccines, if you want to make sure that you're reducing the amount of racial bias in society, the way to do that is not by pretending it doesn't exist towards either group. The way to do that is by acknowledging it exists towards both groups. Acknowledging it's probably more severe towards black people than to white people on average. If you take a look at how black people live versus how white people live, black people are stuck in much worse conditions mostly through generational wealth and other means. So if you really care about the discrimination towards white people, and you really care about the discrimination towards black people, making sure to at least admit, right, that there's going to be a bias towards a worse off life for black people, and the black people do have it worse. It's probably important to at least mention.
Over to Rob, then down to Andrew.
Okay, so I got 2 points to make here. Real quick, you say that race should be one of the factors because there's some sort of correlation. What do you mean by that correlation?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of correlations that are going to be important. One of those is like the one that Bunk mentioned earlier. Another one that could probably be the case is you probably might have you're going to have a disproportionately less healthy population among black people than among white people. Poorer health outcomes.
But all of that, okay. But all of that,
less ability.
Hold on before you.
Healthcare as well, less ability to go.
But listen, all of that is saying saves most lives, right? That's the idea the CDC should be doing. Who gets this? And you're saying, well, maybe their race correlates into that, correct?
So I'm saying that the race can correlate into that, but what's really important to mention is not just the race correlating into it, but other factors as well.
Right. So slide 21, and I'm quoting, initially vaccinating the age 65, the more white population, in phase 1B averts approximately 2 to 6.5 more deaths compared to targeting. So according to the CDC, you can talk correlation.
Sorry, you can't read, Rob. I have to stop you. Right. What was the first word in that sentence?
Initially?
There you go.
Okay. And what's your point?
Initially, we're looking at long-term outcomes, not just what initially seems to be the case.
The idea was,
We're looking at
you guys aren't very bright. What they're talking about is at the beginning of the vaccine
the name calling.
Well, grow some facial hair and then maybe you can get
All right, easy guy. All right, easy.
Grow a little lash.
What it's saying, listen, what this slide is about, please. So what this is talking about, this whole presentation was initially there was a limited amount of vaccines, right? That was the idea. And so the question is, which groups should initially get the vaccine, right? And they're saying if we initially gave it to the population that is more black, the essential workers, we predict that 2.65% more people would die.
Initially, yes.
Right. And eventually, after the initial, are you not getting this? After the initial rollout, there would be enough vaccines for everyone. So the idea was that crucial time frame at the beginning. Who do we get this? They're literally saying, I'm not confused. I can
explain it to you.
Go ahead. You explain it.
Sure. Yeah. So if we're saying that black people are skeptical of black people are very skeptical of institutions, they're very skeptical of medical, because of things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, they're very skeptical of going and getting the jab, right? I think that it's very easy to say that initially what we're going to see is that one group is going to have like this really, really good short-term effects, the elderly, right? And then the other group will gain in terms of herd immunity by early on making sure that we have a lot of people immunized.
Makes no sense. They're trying to decide who to give. So now what you're saying is this. Well, the reason is this. If we gave the vaccine to black people, they wouldn't be as trusting, so they wouldn't take the vaccine. That's what you're saying.
No.
So then explain
hold
to
on,
me
guys.
what you're
I'm sorry. I got to push pause on this. We need to kick it down to Andrew because YouTube been going back and forth. Andrew had his hand up. Andrew, down to you, sir.
I want to hear him finish the conversation.
Never mind. Go back to you two. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, so explain to me what you mean.
I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to be fair.
Yeah, no problem.
It's taking fully into account. It's saying, okay, but by the way, let me just spill the first group they give it to is healthcare workers. So when they say group 1B, what they're talking about is after healthcare workers, which everyone would agree makes sense. The people that are in direct contact with COVID should get the vaccine first if it's going to work, right? So then the question is, who's the next group to get it? Because there's a limited amount of vaccines. And so the CDC, it doesn't matter what me and you think. The CDC says, if we initially gave this group the vaccine, we would save 2 to 6.5% of deaths. That is exactly what it's saying. So explain to me your scenario, how when they say that initially it would save 2.65% more deaths, that it doesn't mean that. Go ahead, explain.
Yeah, so you got the sentence correct the second time. So what they're saying is initially it saves people's lives, and then down the line, right, that's not the case. So down the line, it could be the case that even though it initially saves people's lives, it's action that we're doing today can save people's lives initially. It ends up having more deaths long term. And those deaths can come through things like, for example, if you have a group of people who are very skeptical of the vaccine for very good reason, given their past history with vaccines and with tests with things like syphilis experiments, what you're going to end up seeing is that this group, you can build up immunity in large numbers of the group really early on, and this can have knock-on effects down the line.
Mm-hmm. That makes no sense. How does that address it? They're talking about. So wait. Okay. So explain to me. So what you're saying is this, right? No, so let me get this, right? So we have two choices. We either give it to the over 65 people or we give it to the essential workers that are more black. And you're saying they're acknowledging that if we gave it to the over 65, so in that crucial point for 2 months where we don't have enough vaccines for that other group, we give it to the over 65. And in that period, we would initially be able to save 2 to 6.5 more percent more. But if we give it to this other group, initially, like this month, we'd see 2 to 6.5 more percent death. But somehow it would save lives in the long run because these people explain that.
Oh yeah, so just because the push within this given group, having that kind of herd immunity is going to protect that group. Whenever the vaccines become available and the more trusting group hits their hands on them, they're going to be able to vaccinate themselves and get that herd immunity that way. But whenever it would be flipped around, it wouldn't be the case that the other group would get the vaccine. Now you can laugh at it, right? It just makes perfect sense. Cynthia explained it, I've explained it, and the best
you haven't explained it.
As a response is
you keep saying there's hesitancy. So you're saying that if we gave it to the group, or are you saying we force it on them? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, not that we force it on them.
Okay,
said
so
force
then
it on
they're
them.
hesitant to
Take the
think that
control of the position. What I said was a
And
push.
All right, gentlemen, I gotta step in. I gotta step in.
Early
I
on,
apologize.
in order to
I know.
have Jordan Eve.
Ceasefire, guys. Ceasefire. The round has come to an end. I know you're in the midst of it. We have spent over an hour on this topic, and we really veered, which is a good thing. I always love when conversation veers. We need to move on to the next topic. Everybody, I was gonna do round final closing statements, but we veered so far from the original topic, which was Ilhan Omar, to this. I feel it doesn't even bear doing
This was
a.
round one.
This was round one.
That was the same topic.
It's fun though.
All right, so the next topic, we're gonna. Do y'all need a break? Would y'all like to take a 5-minute break, or are you good to continue?
Let's do it.
good, but it's
Roger, everybody's fired up, juices are flowing. All right, let's push on.
Adrenaline's pumping.
Here we go. Days have elapsed, and the Chinese-owned balloon still continues to float over the northern state of Montana and heading towards Kansas. It remains untouched by the United States military. China has said the balloon is nothing more than a weather information gathering balloon and is owned privately. The U.S. government says they acted quickly on the balloon to ensure it wasn't able to spy on America. Their reason for not engaging the balloon was possibly injuring people on the ground. Is this the best approach in dealing with a conflict regarding Chinese aircraft in U.S. airspace? Is there anybody that needs me to repeat the question? Everybody's good? All right, we're going to start with opening statements, 1 minute apiece. We're going to go ahead and start with Bunk this time. Bunk, you have 1 minute. Go ahead, sir.
Shit, we're starting with me? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know too much about the given topic. If it is the case that it is going to result in a large amount of civilian death whenever you were to shoot down a given aircraft, yeah, I would say that's probably a bad idea. Like, prima facie, like on first glance, it seems to be a bad idea. But I don't know. I'm open to having more information introduced to me, which could change my opinion on the given subject.
All right, we're going to kick it over to Rob. You got 1 minute. Go ahead.
So it's difficult. First off, I don't know a lot about this because we're taking an administration that I don't trust for shit's word that this is a Chinese balloon. I think that China may have admitted that it was theirs, but I don't know. I'm always skeptical anytime some story like this comes out that we're actually being told the real truth of what's going on. But if I accept that it is actually a Chinese military craft, like absolutely it should have been shot down. It should have been shot down over the Aleutian Islands when there weren't people. There were rural areas of Montana where it should have been shot down. I will say this, that in general, the Chinese are emboldened because Joe Biden, whose family has deep connections to China and is giving 10% to the big guy, did things early on that we proved that were not critical of China, such as stopping the task force that was looking at the origins of COVID coming from Wuhan. We now know that's because his buddy Fauci was partially funding through EcoHealth Alliance, which, by the way, was funding biolabs in Ukraine as well. So what we can see is that there's actually this pro-Chinese and weakness narrative that comes through our government, and we're getting pushed around, but hey, at least we have a bunch of generals that dress in dog masks and shit and are transgender now. So
I don't know how much further in a circular motion you could have taken that. Goddamn, Rob. Like, goddamn. We started with Chinese balloon, Chinese ties, dog. Man, okay. I love that. All right, we're going to kick it down to Andrew. Andrew, you got 1 minute. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so it's all complete bullshit. It's always bullshit. Every time the official narrative comes out for anything like this, it's completely and totally bunk. Right, not to mention him. Right, not to mention him. I am glad to have heard one of the leftist counterpoints, Synth, say what you want, just kind of like a diversion. Real quick, to the former topic. At least he was willing to acknowledge, unlike most leftists, that there is anti-whiteness out there. So I appreciated that. Now moving into this, again, I can't make it any more clear. I simply do not believe it. And until we have more information, there's no reason to believe it. And by the way, the military's job is to deceive, including the public, based on other phenomenon that may be going on. So there's really no reason for us to believe this narrative at this point.
All right, we're going to kick it over to Synth, and then we're going to go into roundtable discussion, open table. So it's basically, you can go ahead and open the debate floor. Synth, you have 1 minute. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to downplay how much we should be worried about China. They're spending a lot more on things like AGI than we are over here in the U.S., which makes them a much bigger threat than anything that the U.S. military is doing. Take a look at Pentagon's funding on AGI and take a look at the People's Liberation Army's funding on AGI, and you'll see that like one of these is clearly leading the way. But I don't think the narrative espoused by Chinese officials, which is that it's just a civilian airship, it's just being used for research, and it wasn't meant to be there. I don't think that's an unbelievable story, and I think that it's the kind of story that, if it's the case that you come out with a story like that, you say this is a meteorological research airship or something, and then the U.S. government shoots it down. you put yourself in a really, really, really hard spot, which is that a lot of instruments used for meteorological research are not going to be the same instruments that you're going to use for things like espionage and spying. And I think that if you fly a balloon over military bases, and that balloon ends up being filled with a bunch of stuff that very clearly isn't going to make much sense for meteorological purposes, and your official statement, that's all it is for. It's just a civilian airship for meteorology. That ends up looking really, really, really bad, and ends up looking very, very, very instigatory towards, I think, U.S. officials. So I would assume that the Chinese have not made a really stupid decision by lying about what this is for. I think that total radio silence from China, if it's for the purpose of espionage, would have been a better decision on their end. It seems like it's kind of not that big of a deal, all else considered.
It's open debate, gentlemen.
Oh,
Yeah,
but wait, the newspaper said it was a big deal, though, Synth.
That is true.
Yeah, and
Well,
the news companies
media
said, the news companies said so, though. This news company said it was a big deal, though, right?
I just don't like. To me, I just like. I agree with Andrew 100% here. I don't know what the fuck to believe when you hear this stuff. It's like Ukraine. Like every day you hear the ground. Oh, torture by Ukrainian soldiers against Russian. Oh, torture by vice versa. And it's like I know enough to not believe any of this bullshit. But the general theme, which is this, that the leaders of this country don't give a fuck about this country. They don't care. They're globalists. They don't give a shit about our national security. They give a shit about consolidating power. They give a shit about not caring about average people, whether you're on the right or the left. They'll say what they think they can to pretend they give a shit about these people, but they don't. And in reality, Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer would far more partner with a Chinese entity or government to consolidate their power than they would stick up for the people of America. That's the God's honest truth. Now, is what we're being told about this Chinese balloon accurate? Probably not. It's probably some bullshit. And Andrew's absolutely right. Our military isn't going to tell the truth to us. Like maybe they know something, right, that we don't know, and they're not going to tell us, right? So who the hell knows what's going on? But in general, if China flew an aircraft over and we absolutely all knew definitively that it was a military aircraft, absolutely it should be shot down.
I don't know if I agree with. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the last part. I agree with everything up until now that Rob said, but everything should be. You should always be cautious about any type of military action, even if it seems like there's a perceived aggression, because of the narrative spinning. I think, Rob, because they might shoot first and then give you a narrative where you go, oh, later, 30 years down the road, you go, oh, wait, that was all bullshit. You know what I mean? So I'm a little cautious on that front. I understand in the spirit of what Rob is saying, and I would agree with him. If there was an act of aggression from another nation, of course, we should strike hard and strike fast. But at this point, with this administration and with the way that we're lied to daily about everything, I'm very cautious about any action that is taken by any of them.
Say real quick on that last part. This is assuming the caveat that we're omnipotent and we're all knowing. And of course, the first step would always be diplomacy. So if I'm the general in charge of this in the Biden administration, first thing I'm doing is contacting people in China, right? My counterpart, and I'm like, what is this? Right. And I'm trying to resolve it diplomatically. And if they're just like, oh, it's just a weather balloon, then you have no choice but to assume that it could be. But if there's a possible, okay, yeah, we'll get it out of there, our bed, that's one thing. But I mean, am I the only one who saw Red Dawn? Like not the new one, the old one, right? For all we know, the goddamn commies could be jumping out of that balloon any minute now, right? Then we'll need Patrick Swayze and the Wolverines to take over.
Yeah, that's all propaganda, Rob. It's all propaganda.
The commies are already here.
Yeah, that's true. That's why it's all propaganda.
Synth, go ahead and go over to you.
Sure. Just quickly, so Andrew's dead right. It would be a really dumb decision right now to shoot it down. I have to agree with Rob as well. The reason the military is not currently shooting it down, the publicly espoused reason, which is actually relatively reasonable, is just that there are it's relatively low risk to just leave it there for the time being until it's in a much more sparsely populated area than it currently is. And while it's in this sort of neutrally populated area, the chance of downing a weather balloon and letting it drop on somebody's head could obviously hurt someone, and that ends up looking really bad if the U.S. military shooting down weather balloons and knocking people in the head. Not a great look. Pretty bad optics. Current estimates is not posing a threat in terms of even in terms of intelligence.
Gotcha, Bunk.
It's not really in areas that seem
Gotcha,
all too risky. But it is the kind of area that would be risky to shoot it down, which is most areas in the U.S. Unfortunately, most areas near the coast, other than like a small portion, sort of in the central U.S.
Down to Bunk.
Oh yeah, no, I just I think I agree wholeheartely with what Synth and Andrew are going to be saying here. It's just a very it's very high risk for a very low reward. If it was the case that it's just a weather balloon, which it kind of seems really stupid for trying to be lying about that. If that was the case, or it was the case that that was just a weather balloon, you strike it down and you've got maybe 1 or 2 civilians dead. That makes you look really, really bad. It's a really, really bad choice, both ethically and optically, for the military to strike that type of thing down. But, yeah.
Well, let me give a little bit of pushback here, which is
I'll get you next
we
round.
why don't we capture it? We have the all the technology in the world to just go by if it's just a weather balloon and just capture the damn thing. We don't have to shoot it down. And by the way, those are not high risk operations anymore. To capture things mid-air that are slow moving, there's no high risk there. So we don't have to go with the nuclear option of shoot a missile at it or have a jet airplane fire any type of ordnance on this thing. It can
I have to push
be
pause
captured.
on this real quick, Andrew, because
Yeah.
I feel the need to interject this. I get where the points are coming from our friends on the left as far as the potential optic of it landing on somebody. But as a veteran myself in the Army for a long time, we do have the technology to capture this thing. Thus, the point that I'm trying to make here and get y'all to, and you're getting there now by proxy of Andrew, which is awesome, is why is the
That's because
military
I was in
lying?
the Army too.
Oh, no, there you go. Why is the U.S. government lying about the ability to capture this thing completely safe? No casualties.
By the way, 100% safe. I can't even express to you the types of black units that the U.S. military can employ that are specialized in just such operations and are highly trained for doing them domestically. So makes me think maybe something else is up.
Right,
How much
and that
cost
when I
to go
say
grab one
shoot
of these
down,
out of the
and
air?
it is my fault to say
answer
shoot
that.
it down in that sense. Obviously, like you don't just like it is stupid, but you see it on Twitter. There's like guys with their Jeremiah weed and cigars sticking out their mouth right now, like that motherfucker comes over my house. No one's suggesting that, right? You could intercept it. I don't know shit. I wasn't in the military, but I know there are easy ways to intercept this and make sure it does. And it was over non-populated areas like the Aleutian Islands. Like that is the question. There's a reason this thing's being allowed to fly over. If we thought that there was no risk whatsoever, right, that there was nothing to it, then the U.S. military that really gave a shit about this country would have intercepted, did its best to damage it as little as possible, and then looked at the technology so they could learn as much as possible for it. Or if they thought that it was a danger to maybe there's a reason, like maybe they think it's filled with chemicals that if they would try to approach it, it would explode or something. Who the fuck knows? But there's something going on, right? Like there's no reason for them to not. And this is after, and I just want to say this real quick. Like one of the things about 9/11 that blew my mind was like, how did we, after 3 airplanes hit, have a 4th airplane that hit the most secure building in the world, the Pentagon, right? And it really put into mind the incompetence or the corruption of our government that didn't somehow intercept that. There are consequences that even something that looks benign in our airspace like that could actually cause damage. Try to fly a small aircraft without getting proper clearance or radio control, and there's a possibility of you being intercepted by military people. But somehow we're being told, oh, this is something from the hostile government of China, but we're just going to let it fly. Something's not adding up here.
Let's kick it down to Andrew.
I wanted to
That was a
answer
clever use of let it fly. That was really clever.
I wanted to answer Sin's question because I think it was a good one. It's like, what's the cost? What's the cost difference? Well, a missile costs a lot. And the cost differential in deploying a Black Ops unit for an exercise like this is no more than the cost of training them, doing a training mission for doing an exercise to capture an object like this, right? So there's no difference in cost of the training versus the execution. And in the Army loves real-time training. They love it. It's their favoriteest thing on the whole planet is to do real-time training with real-time scenarios. They will literally put you and send you to disasters that aren't even real disasters, just puddles on the ground, just to make sure that you have enough experience for when the real puddles hit the ground, right? This is the way that the U.S. military tends to operate. So no, I think that the capture cost would be significantly less than an ordnance strike because it would just be
Can I
a
clarify
training
something?
exercise. You know what I mean? Go
Kick
ahead.
it over to Synth.
Yeah. So what I'm curious about is not is it going to be cheaper than firing a missile at it? I agree that a missile is going to be more expensive, but I don't think it's the case that
Missile
a
would never be
missile
an
is
option.
necessarily the kind
A
of thing that
missile
we're talking
against
about
the-
when we take a look at weather balloons. I don't think it's necessary to shoot it down. I think like you could do it with much smaller arms, and that can be relatively cheap. But what I'm curious about is not the relative cost. I'm curious about what is the absolute cost. What is the absolute cost of sending somebody to do a mid-air capture of a weather balloon? That seems like a relatively expensive thing. It seems like the kind of thing that would cost a lot of money. I'm curious how much the cost is.
I couldn't tell you what the exact cost is, but I can tell you that right this second, as we're speaking, the U.S. Army is destroying hundreds of millions of dollars in ordnance that they just find to be useless for whatever reason. And some of it might have gold all over it. Some of it might have diamonds in it. They don't care. The military doesn't care. They don't recycle. They don't repurpose. They throw it in the fucking trash.
I apologize, but I have to interject this. This is a breaking thing here. The Pentagon is tracking a Chinese surveillance balloon that's lingering in high altitude over the western U.S., home to sensitive sites, including nuclear missile silos, defense officials said Thursday. So I have to update that. That changes perspective possibly. So if anybody wishes to change their stance, you're more than welcome to.
I still
I
think
apologize for not having that information readily available. But I
think a capture mission would be probably the best scenario. But there's another thing to think about, which is the reason they're not doing a capture mission, even though it would be simplistic to do and take this thing in, is because then they have egg on their face because they pulled down some guy's backyard experiment that they were trying to blame on China. So you might, it's something to think about.
That's right.
You know.
Now, I will say this though. First, it's nice to have some fiscally conservative lefties here that are concerned about cost.
Our military
that's
budget.
Good. That's nice.
Lefties known
let's keep
for
that
loving
going for.
military budgets.
Let's keep that going for
it's like a stereotypical left-wing talking point. Look at all the military.
Let's keep
spending.
that
It's like a
energy. Let's keep
stereotype
that
one.
Let's keep that fiscal conservative energy going for sending shit to Ukraine, right, everyone? Woo! Anyways, I could add further to this. I could present a link that shows that these very similar balloons since 2000 have appeared all over the world. Japan had a sighting, India had a sighting, the Philippines had a sighting, I think Argentina had a sighting, and there's pictures of them. They all look very similar, and only in one of those cases besides these, there's now one over Canada as well, I believe. So there's two within the confines of sort of the hemisphere that we're in here right now. So these have been appearing again, though, not just that it could be someone's, weather balloon, some farmer or some shit. What if it's something that the United States is doing or NATO's doing or something like that, right? And China, this is the thing with China and Russia. They're not playing checkers, they're playing chess. And I don't mean that they're better than all that. I just mean there's so much shit going on in the background. Putin's not going to say, this is everything I hate about the United States, and this is exactly why I'm doing everything I want. He's going to put shit out there publicly that he thinks will help them in the long run. So China might even say, yeah, that shit's ours. It's innocuous, but it's ours. And maybe it's not. Maybe they're just we're going to leave the people of the United States go, well, if that's the case, why the hell are we leaving it fly there? And the United States government's then well, shit. We can't say it's ours because we've had similar balloons in our allies' countries surveying. So now we all have to play this game well, yeah, it's China's, but we can't do anything. So who the fuck knows? I don't know.
Over to you, Sent.
So I think there's two big things that are worth mentioning here. One is that it's not the case that China's denying this coming from them. So I don't think it's the case that it's if we shot it down, we'd have too much to worry about in terms of whether or not it's just some random Americans. It's certainly Chinese. It's just that what's in dispute is it surveillance or is it just a off-course meteorological instrument? Is it a weather balloon for the purpose of weather, right? Not like a weather balloon for the purpose of spying on the U.S. I think that the location of the weather balloon is going to be of importance. I think that if we see them near, I think John, did you say it was a nuclear power? Did you say it was a nuclear
silo?
Nuclear silo.
Yes, sir.
Say one more time.
Silo.
Thank you. Yeah, if we see it near nuclear silos, I think there's a lot more suspicious of these things. I think that we still can't necessarily know if we want to pin it on the Chinese government with that alone. I think there's a lot of epistemic uncertainty. There's kind of like a fog of Cold War, right? You could say around where exactly it's coming from, what it's doing. Sorry, did you just say something, Andrew?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't think there's a lot of meat here for us to even argue over. Yeah. I think we're all pretty much in agreement here. We don't have enough information yet to make to make any justified opinions, and none of us are really all that trustful of the official narrative yet. There's not enough info.
No, I don't
I
think we have
will
much
say
to
just
disagree on.
because the one thing I'll disagree with Cynthia is just because China said it's ours, says it's theirs, that doesn't necessarily mean it is. There could be political reasons for them to claim it's theirs and not. But again, we just have no clue. But the narrative as it's being told by the Biden administration is clearly bullshit, right? Like, and like, I don't know why they're not just more. I know that this won't work. I know why they don't do it. But like, I'm not even calling Biden administration corrupt or incompetent, which they're both, right? But in this instance, it's like, why don't they just say, we can't tell you more about this? You're safe. Don't worry. It's not a danger, but we can't speak more. Instead, like, they're out there smugly being
Gotcha,
like,
Monk.
someone asked them, they were like, are you going to keep people updated where it's at? And the Pentagon guy was like, yeah, if you want to look up in the sky, you can see where it's at. It's like, holy shit, could you come off as more smug? And, you know, and when you find out, it's like, okay, so it's possible surveillance and it's over these nuclear silos. And now there's a second one coming. And the narrative they're telling us is this is China, but don't worry about it. I think they would have been further ahead to just be like, look, there's no danger. Don't worry about it. But the story they're telling us is bullshit. They might have good reasons for bullshitting us. I doubt it because they're corrupt and incompetent and they don't give a shit about our country. But there's nothing known. So I don't know what to debate about.
Down to you, Bunk.
Oh yeah, so I just wanted to answer I guess to Rob's question about like why can't they be more honest about this? Well, I think the simple answer is that politics is a game of power, right? If you have an administration and it appears as though they're not willing to give answers, that can actually be worse. It makes them look more dishonest than if they just lie about it and they act like they can keep you fully in the loop.
Gee, Bunk,
right?
is politics a game of power, Bunk? We didn't know, Bunk. We didn't know politics was a game of power. Thanks for enlightening us all, Bunk.
Dude, this is the Biden administration
Can
that
I
never
finish?
answers
Hold
anything.
on.
Can I
I'm sorry.
finish
Bunk
my
wasn't
question?
finished. Go ahead, Bunk.
Oh yeah, so most people aren't going to look into things the in-depth way that we will look at things critically. So just giving it an answer, even if it isn't a fully truthful answer, it's going to look better to the public.
The Biden
Over to
administration,
Rob.
that doesn't work because they don't give a shit about that. They never answer anything.
You don't
Right?
think the
Like,
Biden
so I'm just
administration
saying,
gives a shit about being reelected, how they look.
no, they don't give a shit about not being
God, that's
forthcoming
going to
with
be
information
the
because
first organization
all right,
to
look,
not
I'll
get
wait.
re-election.
Right, of course they want to get reelected and have
interrupted.
power. What I'm saying is they've showed example after example that they're willing to say we're not going to talk about it. They've done it all constantly on any issue you could think of. Economic issues, Biden scandal issues, bombing ISIS-K. Whoops, it wasn't ISIS-K. It was a bunch of kids of our allies. You know, shit like that. They've constantly done this. Right? All I'm saying is, like, look, I could steel man positions that the Biden administration is saying what they're saying, and it's not nefarious on their parts. It's not hard to come up with possible scenarios. So it's difficult to debate this because we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. But I'm just saying they sound really fucking dumb. And anyone with half a brain, it's like, so wait, you're saying that this is over nuclear silos and stuff like that, and it's from the government of China, but you're cool with just letting it go. That just sounds stupid. It raises more questions than it answers. And I'm smart enough to know it's because
Gotcha, Seth.
they're not going to give us the information, as everyone here is, but.
All right, over to Synth.
Sure. Yeah. So just to respond to one little bit of what Rob said there, Rob mentioned that it's it being over nuclear silos from China, and yet they're not going to shoot it down. I think that it being over nuclear silos is kind of the exact kind of reason you wouldn't want to shoot it down. That's like the worst possible place to shoot something down at. Now it's very, very expensive property getting damaged as opposed to falling and hurting someone. Which if we
already dealt with that
US
argument.
government, it's
We
not-
dealt with that
sorry.
argument. We could capture it. We don't have to shoot it down.
So even if the capturing argument, I don't think was dealt with really. I'm still confused about like the overall cost of something like that. It's the kind of thing that like is budgetarily reasonable. And without that in question, it just seems like the best option ends up being wait for it to be gone and then shoot it down.
A team
Well,
trained,
let me go ahead.
again, Synth, a team that's trained to do that, it's no more cost for them to go exercise in the real world any more than it would be a training exercise, meaning that they would just replace a training exercise with that cost and give them something else to do that day, like pull weeds, something like this. That's how it generally ends up working. So
And if we can't-
military loves
it's
real time.
Unscheduled training exercise though.
Yeah, a scheduled training exercise. If
Unscheduled.
they're- Yeah. So that's what they're designed to do. You're supposed to have unscheduled training exercises. This is a perfect opportunity for them to do it. They would just take it out of some other training exercise that was affiliated with it, and that way they would just absorb the cost. The military does this constantly. You can't even imagine how often they do, but it's a lot.
So you
And I
probably
just
want
want to say, Bunk, Synth, it's not that the stakes
ahead.
aren't high, because as a civilian, if you fly aircraft over a top secret nuclear site, right, or you set foot into a secret government site like that, like they will intercept you and they will execute you if you go.
Gotcha.
So we're talking about a military, right? We're talking about an intelligence agency. If you're on a nuclear sub and you take a picture and send it to your family, they'll throw your ass in jail. But their narrative is there is surveillance over our nuclear sites from a hostile foreign government, but we're just going to let it slide. Like, and if the argument is, well, it would be too dangerous to shoot it down over the nuclear site, okay, we've dealt with that. And if the argument is, but it would cost too much money to do it, I think that it wouldn't cost that much money, as Andrew's saying. And the stakes, from what we're told by our government, of, oh, we need to protect these sorts of secrets. Remember, they raided Trump's home because he may have had nuclear secrets, raided a former president's home. What was the cost of that? Not in monetary cost, but in distrust of the government cost. But now we're being told, but it's no big deal if the Chinese government surveilling over our nuclear sites.
All right, Rob, go ahead and over to Synth.
Sure. So in regards to being using it as an unscheduled training exercise, I feel like there's going to be issues as well. It's the case that, like, yeah, it could be unscheduled for the individuals doing the training exercise, but it's not unscheduled for every single person along the chain of command all the way up. That's not how you do it. You don't just like spontaneously pick a random time and do a training exercise, right? Or not pick a random time, I should say. Just do the training exercise without even picking a random time beforehand. It being a totally unscheduled training exercise seems like the kind of thing that would clash with the kind of budgetary responsibilities. There's certain amounts totally factored in. I'm sure that's like a confusing bureaucratic hassle. All of which could be reasons not to do this yet and to wait
Gotcha, Andrew.
until it's in a safer area and just shoot it down normally with conventional weapons.
They don't care, Synth. The military doesn't care. They don't care about a little teeny tiny budget that would go into capturing a weather balloon. They don't give a shit. Okay, these people waste money in ways that you can't even imagine. You can't imagine enough ways to waste money to figure out all the ways that the U.S. military does it. They don't care about the additional cost of the capture of a weather balloon versus shooting it down over, some desolate wasteland, especially if there's intel to be gained. The amount of intelligence that you would think you would be able to get from a Chinese weather balloon, you would think that would be of great interest to the United States military, don't you?
Yeah, so I completely agree that it would be of great interest to the United States military, but like you said, shooting it down over a desolate wasteland is the right approach, not shooting it down over a missile silo.
Or just capturing
shooting it down over
But you're
somewhere
not
that's
shooting it
desolate.
down.
Oh, sorry, Rob, are you speaking? I couldn't hear you.
We're not shooting down. No one's talking about that now. I fucked up and said that early. I'm admitting I was wrong. We're talking about, There's no danger. John or Andrew, you know more. I think we all trust you would know more about the other three of us here because you're in the military. Is there a potential danger to this sort of operation you're talking about?
Could I really quickly finish, Rob?
Yeah, let's Synth finish, Rob. He was on making that point.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
the reason I was saying shooting it down over a desolate wasteland was because those are the words that Andrew used, unless I misheard you, Andrew, there. Shooting it down over a desolate wasteland, I think that's a fine idea. I think that's probably the best idea. I think capturing is probably way more expensive than just shooting it down when it's in an area where you don't have to worry about it hitting anyone or hitting anything that's expensive.
Well, you could capture it in a desolate area, too.
You could probably capture it in a desolate area.
And then you get the
intel.
Then you get the intel as well, and your soldiers get experience. It's everything that you'd ever want. Now, I don't have the
either way.
Yeah, I don't have the same, well, not the same amount as having it intact if you shoot it down. So
well, I agree,
and,
but that's
and there's
really...
almost there's almost no risk. But as to this, you would, as far as military experience goes, I don't have anywhere near what Burke has. I was only in for a short amount of time, but yeah, I'm just telling you that the amount of waste that I saw was astronomical, and I just don't think that they would give a shit about the cost of an operation to capture a foreign weather balloon over our soil. I think that would be of great interest.
Let's go to Synth, and then we're going to go into some closing statements because we have to get to round 3 because we're already approaching 9:30, and this is supposed to end at 9:30. So anyway, Synth, go ahead.
Sure. So I think that I agree with Andrew that the United States military is an incredibly wasteful institution, and we'd be better off with a huge budget cut. Just something like that we could then spend on better and more important things, or at least shoring up other things that are, I think, underspent on already. So the issue, though, is that I don't think it's just because of the fact that we'll gain more intel having it intact that really justifies the sort of bureaucratic hassle. And I agree that the higher ups, like the people making budgetary decisions in Congress for the military, probably don't care too much about how poorly that spending goes. But I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are like lower level bureaucrats who do have some concern for making sure that things are going according to plan, or they're held to the standard of caring about things going according to plan, even if it's not the case they necessarily do.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to have to go into closing arguments. Closing arguments is 1 minute to restate where your stance is on the current discussion regarding the Chinese weather balloons. So we're going to start 1 minute. I remember in the closing statement, no direct shots at any other panelist, no direct engagement, because again, that is not fair. All right, we're going to go ahead and start this time with Andrew. Andrew, you have 1 minute. Go ahead with your closing statement.
Yeah, so I think in the end, the disagreements on this are pretty slight. And I don't think that they matter. They're kind of distinctions without merits in some ways. I don't think that Synth really would care too much about a capture mission if it was successful, or the budgetary confines. Think he's somewhat neutral on it. But for the sake of argument, you might as well take the devil's advocate position, right? So the thing is like, from my standpoint, I think that this thing inevitably, if it's a foreign military balloon or a foreign military object of any kind, it'd be of great interest to the United States government to capture it for any type of intelligence that they can get. By the way, that would be pretty much standard operating procedure. The other thing that I would have to say on this is that while Synth I understand your bureaucratic view, but understand that there's a bunch of assholes right now in a small room who are chomping at the bit, yelling at people that they need to give them the order to go to either take this weather balloon out or capture it, because that's how Army brass works. They can't help themselves. So, thank you. All done.
All right, we're going to kick it over to Bunk. You've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Okay, shit. All right, so I don't know too much about military operation. It's not my area of expertise. I take it that John and Andrew both know far more than I do about the given subject. If it is the case that it is most effective whenever it comes to cost to capture it rather than shoot it down, I think that should be the route that we go. If it is actually more expensive to capture it than to shoot it down, it might be the case that we should shoot it down over a desolate area. Either way, I'm not too committed on this position. That's something that I know very much about, and I like to be agnostic on things that I don't know anything about. So, yep, that's about my closing statement.
All right, we're going to kick it over to Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like Andrew said, I think there's a lot of agreement on this topic. What we know is that we don't know, right? That's what it comes down to. We just have no idea. It's easy for someone like me who distrust almost all of our establishment institutions, and particularly the Biden administration, to say this is more corruption or incompetence from them. But it could conceivably be maybe there's some, if I'm playing devil's advocate, maybe China's like, if you do this and take this balloon down, something terrible will happen. We'll do something else. We'll invade Taiwan. Who the hell knows? Maybe there's diplomacy going on in the backgrounds. I don't know. I don't think that sort of the cost prohibitive nature would stop something like this, not just because this is what Army people live to do, which I trust as being true, but also because the stakes of what we've been beat into our head as a populace for so long about the importance of nuclear secrets and protecting government entities and things like that, and against surveillance. That's been beat into our heads for so long. I don't think that a military that is so fiscally unresponsive would all of a sudden on this particular issue say, well, we would do this, but we're afraid because of the cost. So there's something going on behind the scenes. I doubt we'll ever learn the truth of it. But yeah, fuck the Biden administration, our establishment anyways.
Sent over to you. Got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Sure. So I don't think there's much nefarious going on behind the scenes, but I'm not trying to just play devil's advocate here like Andrew. Andrew might have gotten the impression that I was. All I'm trying to do is make it really clear that there is a lot of epistemic uncertainty surrounding this. There's a lot of things that we can't really know, a lot of things that are kind of unclear. And that's not just unclear to people who are hopping on the panel now, who might not have been like versed in this kind of like the quick in and out news story that'll probably be yesterday's news in like a week. But I think it's the kind of thing that is also true of the people making these decisions, the military officials who are like giving out these statements currently, who don't really know that much of the situation either. It's kind of unclear to them as well. The situation is, I think we all agree, one that we wish we could know more about, but unfortunately we just can't.
All right, gentlemen, that wraps up round 2. So we're going to push into round 3. Does anyone need a break?
No.
Everybody's good? Yeah. All right, we're going to push into round 3. Round 3 being the final round, and I think definitely way more divisive. I guess those other two were kind of softball. I figured there'd be a little bit more division, but on more major topics.
That horseshoe theory, man, I'm telling you.
I'm starting to see that myself, honestly. I never thought I'd be in a position where I'd agree with something like that. But yeah, it's like you look over and you see, it's like, we're not that far apart just on certain issues like abortion and shit like that. But yeah.
Those end
all
up
right.
being the relevant ones, right?
maybe
Yeah,
killing.
yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. It definitely a lot of, naturally, main
We all hate
controversial
the
topics.
government for different reasons.
Bro, I'm not gonna lie. When y'all were debating COVID stuff and how black people don't trust the government because of shit like that, it's like, bro, I'm a veteran. I stand right there. Fuck them. I'm right there with them. It's like I don't trust the fucking government either. It's like Agent Orange. It's like the shit they did the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's like, duh, I get where black people come from. It's like I wouldn't trust the government either. All right, here we go with the last one. All right, President Biden has announced the M1 Abrams tanks are being sent to Ukraine, which are being specially built with lower grade armor, not depleted uranium. For those that don't understand that, it means essentially these tanks that are being built specifically for Ukraine are not top of the line tanks. This is not the best that America has to offer. They're set to arrive in late 2023. This atop the billions the United States has already sent in regards to food, ammunition, weaponry, and more. Where do you see this conflict going, and will America fully commit to a war allied with Ukraine against Russia? And when I say fully commit, I mean boots on the ground, regardless of formal declaration of congressional declaration of war. Do you see America getting involved in a ground war with Russia? Does anyone need me to repeat that question? I apologize if I wasn't clear towards the end there. Everybody's good? All right, we're going to go ahead and start the 1 minute round intro with Synth. You've got 1 minute. Go right ahead.
Yeah, the quick and clear answer is no. America's not likely to start a ground war with Russia. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would be a smart decision for them. That doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would be a smart decision for Ukraine or for the world at large. So I don't think there's a good reason to go send boots on the ground into Ukraine. One of the big issues that has to be kept in mind when it comes to the Ukraine conflict is increase in chance of nuclear weapons being used. Currently, we are the closest to midnight that the Doomsday Clock has ever had us. The Doomsday Clock is a council of nuclear physicists, nuclear scientists, and a lot of other experts who are very knowledgeable and not just bloviating or like pulling things out of their ass. Genuinely very smart people think that we are on the brink of nuclear destruction right now, and it's because we are. The increase in hostilities throughout this war. Russia is a nuclear power. Ukraine is not. Ukraine has a lot of backing from a lot of nuclear powers. That becomes a big issue. That's what we should be worried about, and we should hopefully, the U.S. should use its kind of very special negotiating place to bring to an end as to the war in Ukraine through diplomatic means as soon as possible.
Rob, over to you, sir.
I don't think that we'll see U.S. troops on the ground, though the possibility of escalation certainly is there. But the truth is that the people that lied us into Libya and lied about Afghanistan, and lied about Iraq, and lied about Vietnam, they don't give a shit about the people of Ukraine. They're more than happy to continue to send munitions so that they can continue to fund their military-industrial complex friends and continue to have a situation where Ukraine, there's so much corruption that implicates so many people in positions of power, particularly in the Democratic Party, but not limited to them. They want that war to on-go because it's good for them, and they want to use the people of Ukraine as cannon fodder. They know that they'll be less likely to do that if actual U.S. troops start dying there. There's already waning support of the financing of that war because there's a blank check that's being sent and we're constantly lied to. The narrative that we're told constantly is bifurcating, which is one, Russia's already lost. They're getting their ass kicked. There's nothing they could do. But please send a blank check or else they'll steam right through Ukraine and be in Poland next week. Like, it's just horseshit. And if they sent troops on the ground, it would make it even worse. So I have a lot more to say in the Ukraine situation, but that's it. They're more than happy to watch the Ukrainian people die.
Over to Bunk. Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically everything that Synth just said, I just agree with all of that.
That's it. Are you serious? You don't want to
Yep.
add anything? Okay,
No.
fair enough. Roger that. Just making sure.
Listen. Forward policy is not my best topic, and then
Oh, that's
like, said all
fine.
the
I
things
just-
that I know, and I'm like, damn, dude, what the fuck am I supposed to say now?
I just want to make sure I'm
damn
not
it.
cutting you off if it was a joke. But fair enough. That's perfectly fine. All right, Andrew, over to you, sir. You've got 1 minute. Go ahead.
Riveting opening statement by Bunk, by the way. Now, just to dive into this, couple few things. One, the Doomsday Clock. Remember earlier, Synth said that Christians have become Protestant Christians a doomsday cult. I consider that to be a scientific version of a doomsday cult. I don't care what they say as far as the nuclear countdown goes. Don't believe them, and I think they're full of shit, and that we're not going to know and are never going to know. Two, the big thing that's going on in Ukraine, we're talking about boots on the ground. I could see a limited police action like we saw in Vietnam. You start with forward observers, things like this. The war is not over and clean like the Russians thought it was going to be. Is it possible that we can have police action there? It is possible we can, and a lot of people are beginning to discuss that possibility. Do I think that it'll be something that happens anytime soon? No. But do I think that under the guise of Russian expansion, that they will try to push us more and more towards that? I do think that that's a possibility. On to the Abrams tank. If you just give me 10 more seconds.
Hey, we're in open debates. It's floor is yours. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so I understand on the Abrams tank front why the United States military and the U.S. government would not want to send them our best and finest tanks. We don't want them reverse engineered. Period. So we're not going to send them the cream de la crop. We've never done that. By the way, the United States military destroys these tanks and destroys everything down to Humvees. They cut them up just so that they can't even get out to the general public. They do not want these things out in the open to other nations. So
It's open debates,
Sure.
guys. Floor is open.
Yeah.
Synth, go ahead.
I want to respond to Andrew real quick.
Sure.
So you mentioned the Doomsday Clock being a sort of like a thing like a death cult, like the sort of Protestant Christian death cult. This is kind of popular in the U.S. I don't think it's a death cult if the whole goal is to avoid the apocalypse. The whole point of a death cult is that you center your ideology around this future apocalypse, which is inevitable and oftentimes celebrated. And it's oftentimes a good thing. Or
But that's what they're doing.
Sorry,
What-
I couldn't hear you.
That's what they're doing. It's the same thing. They're saying this is basically inevitable. Look how close we are to it. It's the same exact thing. It's just
Total
packaged
opposite.
differently.
It's the opposite, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
predict how close we are to getting what do you call it, some kind of doomsday in order to
How
try and
risky it
reverse
is,
that
yeah.
process. Yeah.
And because they think we're marching towards one.
Well, they think we're
Yeah,
we are
right.
marching-
Same-
we should
same
do that.
exact
We should do
thing
the
that
opposite
the-
of that. Andrew, stop. Hold on, Andrew. We are marching towards one sometimes and away from it the other, and away from it at other times. Which is why the Doomsday Clock has moved back and forth. But what you also see, right, I think that backs up the current Doomsday Clock prediction, is there are also what are called futures markets, which are even more reliable than the most reliable experts, than the most reliable meta-analyses. What you see is futures markets are also predicting a huge spike in the likelihood for nuclear catastrophe.
Futures markets aren't that accurate. One.
Yep.
No, they're not. They're not that accurate. They have failed to show us many times that, especially with AI, they've been remarkably inaccurate. Another thing that I can point at, yes, they have. I can give you, especially like the Trends Research Institute would be a great one that has failed multiple times to produce any of these types of viable. Here's what's going to happen in a futuristic setting in the next 10 years, and a lot of it has not come to fruition. So that's one. And two, what you're talking about is the same thing Protestants are, which is prophecy. They're prophesying that there's probably going to be a doomsday. Sometimes the Protestants say we're pretty far away from it because of prophecy. And other times they say, oh, according to this prophecy, we're a little bit closer to it. I see it as the same exact thing.
Sorry, you said the
Go ahead.
Can I ask Andrew about a specific? You said the Trends Research Institute. You said that one was one that was wrong about AGI in the past. Can you explain to me what you're talking about there?
I'm sorry?
You said the Trends Research Institute was a futures market that you were talking about that you said was wrong about AGI.
Well, it's a futurist predictor, right? Futurist predictor. So
No.
this- yeah,
They're
this was
totally
said-
different things entirely. A futures market is not like a futures market is not like a. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I understand you can't. You're not able to have
Yeah.
the normal discourse, so you go ahead.
Yeah, I can't have the back
I
and
know.
forth, unfortunately, because every time I talk, it cuts you out. But the a futures market is going to be distinct from like a futurist making predictions. Futures markets are they're just like a prediction market or another form of betting market. What you do is you take a look at betting markets on elections, for example, right? They're going to a type of futures market. What you see is that these are much more reliable than any than any expert institution is at making predictions about who's going to win office consistently.
Yeah, yes, no, I understand. Almost everything's a futures market, though, right? So, I mean, anytime you're betting on a stock, it's basically betting on the future. It's always.
That would be one example of a futures market. Yeah.
That's
So
right.
what I'm saying to you though is when we're talking about people who make political predictions for the future, or they make just regular predictions for the future, especially when it comes to AI, they have been wrong often and are often wrong. And I'm very skeptical, and I don't want to get bogged down forever on the Doomsday Clock. I'm just telling you from my perspective, Doomsday Clock's been around for a long time, right? The hands always seems to be pretty close to midnight, never seems to get there. Very skeptical of it being anything other than kind of a I don't know, a gimmick, for lack of a better
It's a
word.
gimmick. And if I can, right? Like, so let's talk about one. It's easy
Gotcha.
to say we're closer to nuclear war than we were in the past when there is a proxy war between two nuclear armed superpowers. No shit. Right? I don't disagree, but their idea, it is sort of a fetishization, and it's just more people pushing their own bullshit politics. That's what the Doomsday Clock is. Let me give you some examples. We were closest to midnight in 2006 with the election of Donald Trump. Oh my God, nuclear war's on the brink. Oh wait, we had historic Middle East peace deals, and there was actually calm going across the world. And then, oh my God, in 2020 we were close again. Oh, it was really close because climate change and the use of fossil fuels, says the Doomsday Clock people. Wait a minute, we're talking about nuclear war, but climate. Well, you see, because people are using fossil fuels, and that means that people will get upset and they'll launch nuclear weapons. It's all bullshit. I don't dismiss the claim that actually there is a chance of miscalculation or aggressive nuclear war when you see the United States and Russia going at it, even in a proxy situation. But the Doomsday Clock people are bullshit political activists that are talking out their ass and never admit oh shit when they were wrong.
Synth.
Sure. So, what we want to do is we want to have some kind of other metric other than just the Doomsday Clock to like measure itself against, and to see if these the atomic scientists there are correct in their analyses on this thing that we can't actually test against in the real world, unfortunately. And the best way to do that is using other things that we know are reliable broadly. One of those, like I said earlier, is futures markets. Futures markets are spiking right now for chance of nuclear war. Futures markets are also incredibly accurate in every single field they're deployed in. They seem to be incredibly accurate. AGI is the one that Andrew is talking about. We haven't reached AGI yet, so I don't know what the testability of that one is. Are you making a claim about like shorter term predictions, like, or are you making a claim that they made the prediction that in the past AGI would have come in a futures market?
Yeah, there's actually been heavy dumping in various stocks, bonds, things like this, towards promises various companies have made in the past that AGI or that AI is right around the corner, some sort of actual artificial intelligence, and it's almost been wrong concisely every single time. What they do instead is they package something as being AI that actually isn't AI, but is rather just a program, and it does use algorithmic learning to a degree, but it's not real AI.
Well, that's going to be narrow AI, right? So that's going to be real AI.
That's not AI.
It's not artificial general intelligence, it's just artificial intelligence. So narrow AI is certainly AI, at least in the way it's used in the industry, in the machine learning industry, and the academia surrounding
I think
it.
it's cope. I think it's cope. I think it's cope. Cope AI.
I don't think it's
cope.
I think it makes I think it makes perfect sense to call narrow AI a form of AI. I think it makes perfect sense because the fundamentals for how that works are also the fundamentals for how AGI works. You use an LLM, and that's narrow AI. Use an LLM with enough neurons, right? One that's sufficiently large, and then you have a general AI. If we want to take a look at what futures markets have predicted, though, I'm not familiar with a single one that has ever predicted at any point in the past that we'd have artificial general intelligence. We do have some that predict that we'll have artificial general intelligence by 2050, 2060-ish. And given the kind of things that we have in terms of the innovations with GPT, it makes perfect sense why it's the case that we'd have 2050 is about the time that we kind of expect that.
Well, I guess we'll revisit it in 2050.
Sorry, what?
I mean, I don't know. I don't understand. Like, again, with the claims of future market, like future market's not just predicting, for example, global nuclear annihilation, right? Futures market could be going. That's all it's predicting.
Oh no!
I don't know.
No.
So it could, right.
No.
Right. So
Yeah.
it could, for example, be predicting severe economic decline. Right, and so that could be a reason that the futures
They do.
market is going
Well,
down.
they do.
Right.
They do that. Yeah.
So I don't think that just say when we say, well, Doomsday Clock here and futures market shows that Doomsday Clock people are right. That's bullshit. They're predicting two different things. Yes, nuclear war would drive future markets going down. That's something. But the idea that that's exclusively with futures market, I don't think that's. Go ahead, Seth.
Synth, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let me
There's no
clarify.
interrupting. You feel free to
It's
go.
not the case that. Oh, sorry. What were you saying, John?
As long as there's no interrupting going on, y'all can go back and forth. That's fine.
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's just confusion about what futures markets are. They're like, think of it like trading stocks, but instead of trading stocks in companies, you're trading stocks in some event you think will happen in the future. Like, for example, the election of a president. That's one thing the futures markets predict. Whether or not Trump will get the GOP nomination is another one, right? Whether or not Trump will lose in the presidential election and some alternative will win, or whether or not some specific alternative like Joe Biden would win. These are all examples of ways that futures markets can work. One of the things that futures markets predict is what we can take a look at. We can take a look at estimated risks, even timeline risks on when we expect a nuclear weapon to be dropped, not during testing. And what we see is there's currently a spike for it in the near future, in the near decade, right? It's in the next 10 years. We see a huge spike that we don't see normally. Obviously, we are ones with smaller metrics. Like we're also seeing smaller spikes in like 5 years and 1 year timelines, all of which we see spikes in. If the futures markets are saying this, right, then we can induct that as a good reason to believe that since the futures markets are generally very, very accurate, obviously people don't like to play with their money, the futures markets are also likely to be accurate on this subject, and it corresponds with this expert consensus over here. I don't think it's the case that we should throw out both the experts consensus and this like reliable tool for making future predictions.
I think that it's bullshit. Like the Doomsday Clock is purely bullshit. I understand what future markets are in general. I was unaware that there's a specific future market predicting nuclear war. There's questions of like where you put your money.
I mean, you can use them for basically anything. You can use them for basically anything. Like, I mean, I remember when people were betting on who would win the presidency, and people were putting hefty bets. They were putting hefty bets. And by the way, they were wrong.
So what I'm saying, and what I'm saying, like just because a futures market can accurately predict, say, oil prices, or accurately predict to some extent who wins particular elections, they've never accurately predicted a nuclear war, have they? So the idea to say, well, they've been right in certain areas, and go ahead.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they've so far not been wrong once on nuclear war. Futures markets have been really, really good about that. They've never predicted they were more than 50% of the way, more than 50% likely to have one, which means that they've been consistently correct.
What are they predicting now? More than 50%?
I don't think they're predicting more than 50%.
Oh, so then if it doesn't happen, you'll say, see, they were right. Futures markets were right.
No, Rob, you're confused. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of how we go about the methodology.
You're not confused. I understand. I understand. If you let me finish, I can say it. What you'll say is, the fact that it's increasing shows that it's increasing. Right, but you'll always say that no matter what, as long as it's not over 50%, that they were accurate. So if I come back 4 years from now and say, see, the futures market, you said the chance of nuclear war was going up because the futures market went up to 20%, predicting.
You're deeply confused.
Go ahead, Synth. Explain it to my dumb self. Mr. I understand what the word initially.
Hold on, Robin. I'll explain it to you. Hold on. I will explain it to you. Just relax, okay? So the whole point is we can take a look at futures markets histories in a lot of different areas, not just in the realm of predicting nuclear threats in the future. We can take a look at them broadly. What we see is broadly in basically every single domain, futures markets are really, really, really good at predicting future events. They're really, really good at that. It's the case that I can understand why you might think that there's some specific mechanistic reason. I can't hear you, Rob.
We're good. We got that part. Go ahead.
Oh, you might think there's some specific mechanistic reason that you could propose, and this is your chance to do that. So do you think it would be really bad at this specific domain while it's good at all of the other ones, right? If you want to give me that specific reason, I'd love to hear it. But if you're just saying, I don't trust the futures markets or they've been wrong in the past, then you're just going to be wrong on that. They've been consistently correct in the past on all of the other things. There are some things they predict in the near future that they were right about. There are some things they predict in the long-term future that they will likely be right about. And there are some things they predict as being not more than 50% likely to happen, but much more likely to happen than it usually is. And that is a big risk. If it's the kind of thing like nuclear war, that's a risk that we should care about.
Like you've literally said nothing with that whole spiel, which I understand a leftist sophist is like to do. Right. And so I still stand by what I said, that the futures market's still not predicting that it's over 50%. The futures market's never been accurate when it comes to nuclear war because we haven't had a nuclear war. The Doomsday Clock is bullshit. For example, they're saying we're closer to nuclear war now than we were during the Bay of Pigs invasion. That's something that's stupid. And in general, I'm not even disagreeing with the premise, which is that when two hostile nuclear powers engage in a proxy war, that there's a chance that there could be some sort of nuclear exchange that happens. I don't even disagree with the premise. I think this is all red herring that has nothing to do with the topic because this is
and by the way, just to say this, like you guys really should hope that we're right.
Right? I do hope that you're right. I just don't think I don't think you're as you can be as sure as this as you is. It seems like Rob. I'm not really sure about Andrew, but it seems like Rob is. I don't think the nuclear.
What are you talking about?
I'm saying that it seems like it's the case that the Doomsday Clock in particular has had a long track record of being relatively accurate. There have been times, I agree, where we have.
It's a gimmick, dude. Come on.
You can keep saying it's a gimmick over and over again, but it tracks well with other metrics that we all have to agree.
Okay.
I hope, since none of you are able to try counter-argument other than pretending.
Okay, here's a counter.
I can't hear you, Rob. I've got the audio. When I talk, I can't hear other people. I can't hear you interrupting me. So but this point being, what we have is a long track record. We have a long track record of other metrics that we know are really, really good, right? Which you don't really have counter arguments against, Rob. You can just pretend that you do, right? But you don't. And they all track really well with the Doomsday Clock, which also seems to have a good track record of being relatively predicted. They're not saying that in terms of minutes from midnight, That's some kind of like likelihood or some probability, right? That we're saying is like more than 50%. They're not saying it's more than a 50% chance in the next 10 years, the next 5 years, the next 1 year even, like futures markets do. But we can see that there's a tendency for a correlation between that minutes from midnight on the Doomsday Clock that this Bulletin of Atomic Scientists decides upon, and correlating that with the futures markets. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, the Doomsday Clock people predicted we were closer than ever when Trump got elected. Were they right?
We are closer now than we were then.
Yeah, but they predicted when Trump was elected we were closer than ever. Were they right?
We were probably closer than ever when Trump was elected. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think 4 years from now we'll be closer than ever again when they move the clock up a little further, regardless of who wins?
I think it depends on the kind of things that happen in terms of international politics. That I think is unpredictable.
They're bullshit. What it is they have political agendas. They talk about things like using fossil fuels and climate change and shit like that, leading to the Doomsday Clock. They're saying that we were closer with the election of Donald Trump than we were during the Bay of Pigs. They were wrong. They pretended that there would be some hostility for what the reason they upped the clock when Trump got elected is they assumed that there would be some sort of hostile foreign wars that were more likely. There were less under Trump than there were under Obama, and there were less under Trump than there were under Biden. So they're full of shit. And again, the whole thing's a red herring.
Panic mongering.
I'm agreeing.
It's panic mongering.
Right. I agree that it's like, I agree that the fact that the Biden administration is pushing us into this proxy war is bullshit and dangerous. I don't understand why we're talking about this. I'm just making the point. The Doomsday Clock stuff's bullshit, but I'm agreeing that we're probably closer to a nuclear conflict because it doesn't take a bunch of propaganda-driven scientists to say, oh, we have this specific clock to say, look, 2 hostile nuclear powers are engaged in a proxy war. That probably means that's increased the chance of some sort of nuclear exchange. No shit. But the Doomsday Clock is bullshit.
All right, over to Synth.
Sure. So once again, you just keep saying it's bullshit over and over again, but you're not really able to provide like actual arguments or anything that you could like correlate or anything you can induct from or anything that would actually undercut this as a piece of evidence. All you're doing is saying like, oh, they said my guy bad. I don't like them anymore. They're a gimmick. And then you say that over and over and over again, despite the fact there's a strong correlation with what the Doomsday Clock predicts and what futures markets predict. None of us, not a single one on this panel, I think, is going to be able to reasonably, not like an insane person, but sorry, Bunk, are you talking?
No.
Okay. I don't think a single person on this panel is going to be able to reasonably disagree that futures markets are incredibly accurate consistently over time. Every single one on this panel should be able to agree with that. If it's the case that futures markets correlate with that minutes from midnight, there's a correlation between minutes from midnight going down and futures markets prediction of imminent nuclear disaster going up, that means that there should be good reason to believe that the Doomsday Clock has some kind of accuracy. In the case of Trump's policies, if you want to talk specifically about why they were justified there, right? Since Rob Zorn's going to be doing like a yawning thing or whatever. But if you want to talk specifically about why they were correct on Trump's policies, his policies in terms of climate change were relatively disastrous. You can say that there were less foreign wars, but in terms of climate change, his efforts to bring back clean coal, his efforts to increase subsidies for things like the agricultural industry are all going to be things which are pretty bad on climate change.
All right, it's clear that Synth has nothing to say about the topic, and as a left-wing sophist, this is something that he routinely...
No wonder you put counter-argument.
He says nothing. He says, I can't hear when you're talking, Synth. I can't hear when you're talking. So, okay? Thanks, Bob.
I'm waiting for counter-argument.
So it's clear. I can't hear when you're talking. I can't. So I'm not going to leave him dominate the topic because he's talking about a red herring and has nothing to say about the topic. On to specifically what we're talking about is, I do have an argument. I proved that the Doomsday Clock's bullshit. You don't have an answer why it's good. You just say it's been right in the past and it's never been in the right because it keeps saying that we're getting closer, but the event never happened and it's non-falsifiable. I can say the same thing. I predict more every year. Tomorrow, the moon will be closer to landing into the United States. And then the day after that, even closer. And then the day after that, even closer. And then even closer after that. I've never been wrong. I never said it was more than 50%. Anyways, to get off this topic, because Synth is just trying to draw it out because he has nothing to say on the specific Ukraine situation. It is a catastrophe that the Biden administration is hiding their corruption that's occurred there.
Running away.
Finding out just this week. Please shut up. I sit there, I can't hear. I'm not running away, Synth. Like, you have to understand, people not engaging with your sophistry is not them running away. You have nothing to say, just like you didn't on the initial vaccinate. You have no problem with the racism against white people and the other thing with the CDC. That's fine. We understand how you run away.
I love racism.
Nonetheless, to go on this point, you can see, I can't hear while you're talking while I'm speaking, Synth. I can't hear. Please shut the fuck up. Now, anyways, what we can see is the Biden administration came out this week.
Just argue against it.
Hunter Biden, please shut up. With the Biden administration, we can see that Hunter Biden actually was involved in making money off the Ukrainian biolabs. It's something we see there. We see the connections that the Biden administration's had with Ukraine. We see the corruption that's occurred there through years. We see in 2014 that there was a color revolution that was led by the United States. This is an area rife with corruption, with our establishments, both Republican, but in particular Democratic politicians. And instead of talking about that and how we're asking poor people of all shades in this country to sacrifice more, to send weapons over there, which leads to more Ukrainians dying because we're not encouraging a peaceful resolution, it's causing the sacrifice of regular Americans in this country, and it is drawing us closer to conflicts, including a possibility of nuclear war. But instead of talking about that, we're talking about his fucking doomsday cult.
Sure. While there's some dead air, to clarify, no, Rob, it's not the case that the doomsday clock just gets closer and closer as time goes on. It goes up and it goes down. And it goes up and down based on our risk. So the minutes from midnight is a metaphor, right? A metaphor is a very complicated thing, but I'm sure you can understand it, which is sometimes the risk gets higher, it becomes more risky, and the minutes from midnight goes down, as to indicate that we're closer to midnight. And sometimes the risk gets much lower, and we go far away from it. So if we wanted to take a look at the Bay of Pigs, it's coming right out of a period where the doomsday clock was very, very, very close to midnight. The record that was just recently beaten. That was when the I think it was right after the nuclear bomb testing by both the U.S. and the Soviet Union from hydrogen bombs back in the early 1950s. It was set to very, very, very close to midnight. And then it went up afterwards in 1960. It went up afterwards again in 1963 to indicate that it was becoming less and less risky. And so what we saw is like just after the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union fell apart, we saw a huge growth in minutes from midnight to indicate that it was not very likely. Nuclear war was much less risky than it had been in the past. And to answer your question, Rob, about why it's the case we should believe this, because it correlates with other measures that we know have been reliable in the past, and you have no counter-argument.
Why not just use those measurements then, instead of the gimmick?
If I may, yeah, sure. You can see Since running from the topic again because he has nothing to say on it. And it's because as a leftist, he voted for these same sorts of pieces of shit that are leading us closer to these conflicts. Again, instead of arguing like I'm conceding the point that I do think that we're closer to conflict and nuclear war, I'm just saying that this doomsday clock's bullshit. He just wants to keep hyper-focusing on that because this is a sort of thing that lefties do. They hyper-focus on something just like he was doing in the last topic where it was like, well, maybe the military doesn't have money to spend. It's just bullshit. He says it's not devil's advocate, but what it is it's someone who doesn't have anything relevant to say on a particular topic, making some stupid bullshit point that has nothing to do with it. So again, he has nothing to say on the topic in particular. So I'll ask Andrew. Andrew, do you think that it's ridiculous that we've seen so much corruption that we see in Ukraine that connects straight through Biden and to other people in U.S. administrations, both past and present, and the fact that there's not an attempt to a peaceful resolution? Instead, it seems like we're using the Ukrainian people as cannon fodder to continue this war that's beneficial to a bunch of elite people?
It does seem to be the curious case of the incurious scumbag progressive on this front, doesn't it? Where they don't seem to give a shit about the Ukrainian corruption or the tie-in with the Bidens. They seem to just kind of hand wash it and pretend that it's no big deal and that we should be running over to the Ukraine and throwing as much money at them as we possibly can. There's a lot more here than meets the eye. I don't want to get too bogged down again in the doomsday clock, so I'll just make this concession. Because I just don't think it matters. If you're saying that the symbolism of the doomsday clock correlates really well with this thing that you think is an accurate measurement, and we'll just go off of what you think is the accurate measurement. I don't care about the symbol, though. It's symbolism. It's that in and of itself is not accurate. It's not an accurate representation as a symbol of whatever these markets are saying. If you're saying that the markets are accurate, fine, we can go with that. But that doesn't mean that the correlation for the symbol is in any way accurate. Just let it go from there. I don't think it matters. Maybe we can get on to the rest of this.
It doesn't.
Gotcha.
Sure. So I think it does matter. I think the importance of understanding that there are expert boards who are able to make predictions like this is that we can then use those predictions and the predictions of the futures markets, not just one or the other, right? But using them both in tandem to make projections about the future and make projections about the likelihood.
But the experts claim not to take the doomsday clock seriously. They say it's only a symbol. They say it's only a symbol. Yes, they do.
You're confused.
Well, then tell me.
The minutes from midnight name is the minutes from midnight name is a metaphor. Yes, but it's about likelihood. It's about likelihood of nuclear risk and about that risk in the future. If we want to make sure that goes down and not goes up. We want to make sure we have less nuclear risk and not more nuclear risk. Understanding indicators of nuclear risk It's important for that. So understanding using futures markets for that and using things like the nuclear or using the Doomsday Clock for that are both really useful measures of understanding the most important aspect of this conflict, which is this conflict going to cause a nuclear war? The lives of a lot of people being lost would be terrible, but the lives of a lot more people will be lost if we have a nuclear war. The underlying most important aspects of this conflict is the nuclear aspect. Anything else is a side point in comparison.
So we could see again that Sith is taking this to a direction that has nothing to do with the topic. But since he doesn't want to engage, I will mention this, right? And you can see this in the mindset of the left. Notice how they use these non-falsifiable activist principles in order to justify any sort of political orientation that they want. So this is exactly, I'm sure Synth probably was the type of person that was advocating lockdowns and vaccine mandates and shit like that. And this is what happened with people like Synth that were doing this sort of shit. Right. This is what happened. This is what happened. See, he still says he's correct. And here's how it'll work, right? They'll say this. They'll say, we need to have lockdowns or a huge amount of people will die. We need to do it, right? And so then we could look at what I call like paradoxical universes, right? Let's say that we could objectively see that if we had lockdowns, 1 year after the lockdowns, 10 people died of COVID. That was it. Do you think Synth and people like him would be saying, oh, I guess we were wrong, only 10 people died? No, he would be saying, see, lockdowns save lives. Now, let's say we do those same lockdowns, but now 10 million people died in the United States. Do you think Synth would be saying, I caused all sorts of pains by advocating for these lockdowns, and still that many people died? No, he would say, see, I was right. Look how severe COVID was.
Yes, I agree with that.
He would say, and that's the problem. It's non-falsifiable. Now, you look at how ridiculous he's been. Let me finish, please. You look at how ridiculous he's been with sort of the defense of this. I'm not point lying. Look at how ridiculous, and you can see how it'd be true, because when I mentioned that when the Doomsday Clock's gone up before, that they've not been accurate, and he said, well, no, it never went up to 50%. So you could see then he's trying to have his cake and eat it too, because let's say that there was a nuclear war tomorrow. Would Synth be on here saying, well, the Doomsday Clock was wrong because it didn't have it over 50%? No, he would say, see, it was right. It was slightly increased. And so the fact that that nuclear war happened, the Doomsday Clock was right. But if there's not an attack, will he say it's wrong? He'll say, well, no, it's not wrong. It wasn't saying it was over 50%. It was just saying. So it's non-falsifiable. He would never admit that it's wrong, just like he won't admit that he was wrong with the COVID lockdown. So take his bullshit with a grain of salt.
Bunk, did you have your hand up?
Because
go ahead.
Okay, yeah, because we were 1000% right with the COVID lockdowns. They were just like obviously true. We can look at other countries who have done very quick lockdowns that are effective. But I do want to address the point that Rob made as far as the amount of people who would die with the COVID lockdowns in place. If there's a method that reduces the amount of death and the death is actually higher, the reduced number is going to be higher than it would have been otherwise. That wouldn't be you wouldn't be able to implement a lockdown that reduces the amount of deaths and it would increase them somehow. It would obviously be the case that if there were a lot of deaths, even if it was locked down, it would be a higher amount of deaths had it not been locked down anyway. That would just be obviously true. Okay.
That's
right, hold on. Wait. Synth had his hand up. Let's go over to Synth.
True, but okay.
Sure. Yeah. So in the case of the lockdowns, I mean, there's not much more to say. Bunk kind of just said it there. But in the case of the, if it was the case that like right now, there was a nuclear war immediately, I would say yes, the futures markets and the Doomsday Clock were wrong on this one. They would have been the case that there's under a 50% chance. And even though it spiked, which means they're an indicator, it's not the case. They were correct in terms of how likely that was. Clearly, it's the case that it did happen. It's the case we should adjust our priors accordingly. It's not the kind of thing that I would think that they weren't wrong about. Futures markets where you vote no, where you vote that there's like a 40% chance of something happening. If it's the case that happens, then yes, you do in fact lose out on your money. That resolves to no, you were wrong. You lose your money, and thus people have to update their priors, and thus futures markets are be more accurate in the future because of that.
Over to Rob.
So respond to Bunk. I don't want to straw man you. What you're saying is as follows: that if we see a place that did do lockdowns and less lives were lost than a place that didn't, then that would be a way that we would measure. Correct?
No. So if we see there is a given way that we can control an illness and it reduces the amount of deaths within that given society, if there's a society where that place is implemented and there are a high number of deaths, it is likely the chance, very much so, that there would be more deaths had it not been put into place, more so as scaling with the deaths, obviously.
But wouldn't we compare areas that did that versus areas that didn't to get an idea of whether or not it worked?
Because in baked in,
okay.
Whenever you do that, you see that it's the case that lockdowns work.
So give me a state that, for example, Dr. Fauci, which state did he say did lockdowns the best? Go ahead.
Well, the given states, I don't think the United States of America did it very well.
Well,
I'm
they
not
might
sure
not
which
have done
one
it well, but
Fauci
there
said
was certainly.
specifically would be the best. I believe
Let me
places like
finish.
Australia have done a really effective lockdown.
Let me finish then. Right? Would you not say that there were states that locked down more than others?
There
Wouldn't
were
we
states that
expect
locked
them?
down more than others, but it's very, very hard to control in between given states. And then additionally, because we're within the United States of America, people can get between states really, really easily. I think we'd probably better look at multiple different countries as, again, when it comes to things like the United States lockdowns, they happen very, very late. We were very late to lockdowns, and obviously they're going to be less affected that way. But yeah, I would point to
but again,
myself.
it makes no sense. And this is what you'll see the lockdown advocates. By the way, lockdown, we're only looking at it under one metric, and that was saving COVID deaths. It's not looking at all the pain and abuse. So, for example, when you hear people like Synth and Bunk that'll complain about poor people not having money now and economic starvation and things like that people are having, that's because of the lockdowns they advocate for. So we're not even getting to the reasons why lockdowns kill people for decades, because they damage the economy in serious ways, how it damaged children's education, it damaged people's emotional, psychological health. But just talking about COVID deaths particularly, because they're making the affirmative claim that lockdown saves lives, they say that we can't compare state to state because that's too difficult. Instead, we can compare country to country, but there's going to be more variables between two separate countries than two separate states, surely.
Can you give me two separate states which are comparable, for example, in things like population density that you would like to compare?
Sure, I could do that, and I'll start with this caveat that comparing these two states will be a far more apples to apples comparison to comparing any two countries, because I could say the same thing when you're comparing countries, there's no two the same. So the population density of Florida and New York is relatively similar. The experts told us that Florida would be a hellscape, that there would be bodies laying on the street. They put ads out that said it was the forever purge. They said that Fauci said that New York was the state that did it best, and Cuomo was the state that did it best. When you look, the per capita deaths of COVID is higher in New York than Florida.
Okay, so whenever it comes to places like New York and Florida, the big thing that I can think of that would completely change the way that the viruses would spread would be, one is a climate. The climate would be radically different in a place like New York. As we all know, viruses tend to spread more so whenever it's colder.
But not Australia.
No, we look at places like Australia and Florida, surely. We look at two places with warm climates, right? That would be a big contributing factor.
They're in completely different hemispheres and completely across the world. It's not. So you're saying climate's a bigger factor
in the heats that they're going to be experiencing? Yes, they're going to be similar.
There are similarities. There are similar. Well, it depends.
Australia, right?
Okay, so explain to me. So, for example, okay, you seem to know a lot about this. So explain to me how the climate of Miami is very similar to the climate of, say, Eastern Australia. Go ahead. What's the average temperatures there? What's the average precipitation? Go ahead.
I mean, each of them, it's going to be way more comparable. If you want to actually look at the forecasting data, we can.
Sure, go ahead,
you want to
please.
stop the entire panel? All right, fantastic.
Please, go for it. Now, meanwhile, what I'll talk about is there's a litany of variables. So climate could be one variable. You would also see other variables such as this. You would see variables such as average age, the healthcare system in each country. You would see variables such as the weights of people there. You would see variables such as the policies that each governors or each leaders of those countries interacted. But it's funny how the lockdown advocates, they'll always take two disparate places, right? Like, so they'll say, for example, oh, even though we said Florida would be a nightmare, that there would be bodies lining the street, and that didn't happen. Well, we can't compare it to New York because there's slight differences between Florida and New York. But we can compare Florida, yes. But we can compare Florida to Australia.
I have a real quick question. Rob Noor, what do you think flu season is? Why do you think that comes around?
Why do I think flu season comes around?
Yeah, don't repeat my question back to me. Answer it.
Right. I think flu season comes around because there is an influenza virus that infects people.
Yeah, but why does it come around in a specific season?
Because it's more, it thrives more in different seasons.
In which seasons does it thrive more in?
It depends on influenza, particularly winter. Does it thrive more in? So wait, Joe, I just want to be clear. So if I look at the average,
thrive in the winter.
No problem. Then you're making the comparison.
It's going to be much more likely to spread.
So you're making the comparison. You would say that flu season's never. You're saying flu season's never that bad in Florida, correct?
No, that's not that it's
surely that would be the case. You know that, right? That would be the case because if the warm climates of Florida, no, you brought up no.
All right, we're gonna break it up real quick. Hold on. Calm, real quick. We're gonna kick it down to Bunk first. Bunk, let's go ahead and respond. You have 1 minute. We'll go to Rob. Bunk, go ahead.
Sure. So whenever it comes to, for example, the differences between flu season, the different places, like, yeah, of course, it's probably going to be less so of an issue in a place like Florida. It is less so of an issue in a place like Florida. I know for a fact, and from firsthand experience, that moving from Wisconsin, a very cold place, very, very cold place in the United States of America, to somewhere like Texas that I currently live, flu season is way less of an issue. You have to deal with it way less so.
Okay,
Rob?
so we're just looking at latitudes, then no problem. So can you give me the latitude? We would say that New York's more similar to a place like Sweden.
Probably
Like
somewhat
Sweden?
similar.
Yeah, like Sweden.
What's
Well,
the
what
latitude of
about-
New York?
hang on.
I think New York is south of Sweden.
Hang on,
by a while, isn't it?
but some of this is beside the point anyway, Bunk. For instance, you say what about the variable of the temperature? Okay, the variable of the temperature is there, but what about the variable of the elderly, which I'm sure the state of Florida has a lot more per capita elderly who would be much more disproportionately affected. It's not just one variable.
That is 100% the case. That's why we take a look at studies and people who will compare things that are similar cities within a given location.
Oh, is that why we do all those things?
Yeah, you can do it.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Yeah, tell me more.
I wouldn't be surprised if you did. You can sarcastically say it, but I wouldn't be
So
shocked. As the first
what
thing.
I find
wouldn't
strange
be-
is
you wouldn't be
what I
surprised.
find
take the
strange is
anti-lockdown position. I can't take it. The idea that you're looking at studies all day.
right. So if we're just comparing
You want to
climates,
look at
the
studies
latitude
about
of
lockdowns?
the
You wanna go to
latitude.
that now?
Please. The latitude of Sweden is 62 degrees. Right. The latitude of New York is 40. So
That's
that
a
means
big
that it's
difference.
Right. That's not a big difference.
That's
So
a
the
big
difference
difference, Rob.
between-
That's
Right,
a very
and so
big
it's
difference. I don't know you
right,
how you're
right.
comparing those
Cool,
two.
cool.
The warmest
Excellent,
temperatures
excellent.
then-
So,
okay.
okay, let me finish and I'll explain what the difference is. So then surely Sweden had far worse deaths than New York because the climate's so worse.
No.
No, because Sweden.
Why
locked down
not?
a
The
completely
flu
different way.
season's going to be worse there. It's colder.
They locked. Here's the thing, Rob. They locked down in a different way, more effectively.
No,
than the United
Sweden
States did.
didn't lock
It would
down.
be expected.
Sweden didn't lock down, you dumb
At
shit.
all?
Hey, easy,
Not at all.
easy,
Not at
easy with the
all.
names. Easy with the
I
names.
don't
Not
believe
at
that's the
all.
case. I can
What
be
if,
completely
but like,
honest.
what if the name is
What-
true? Is it
Okay,
okay?
so back,
No, easy.
back to you on the summer seasons between. So within the given temperatures, yeah, it's way more similar as I expected. Whenever I was talking about these two given subjects, the middle 70s to like the upper 80s within Florida, and then whenever you're going to be seeing the higher upper of the temperatures within the hottest seasons within Australia, you're going to be seeing like 26 degrees Celsius.
So you were wrong.
Nope.
Yeah.
I was right.
Yeah. So Sweden didn't lock down. They did much better than New
Do
York.
we
Can
want
you
to
explain that? It's colder.
take a look at the reasons why Sweden went locked down? Sure, let's
You-
go do
you
that
don't-
now.
you don't even know that
because,
Sweden- you don't
because
even know
you
that
just
Sweden
jumped.
didn't lock
No, because you just jumped from a completely different subject. First, we were talking about the similarities
didn't.
between Australia.
No, well,
and
you said they didn't. You said it's because
Again,
they
I don't
locked
believe-
down
I
in a
don't-
different
You said
way.
climate.
Okay.
You said climate.
And
was
that
what
they
you
locked
said.
down in a different way. Both were inaccurate. One was
Right.
a variable set, and then in the other one, you didn't even know that there was no lockdown for them to do. What are you talking about, Punk? You're
The
just
government
spewing a
never
bunch of
says it's really
garbage out of
organized.
your mouth.
So, first of all, let's go back to the original topic that I was talking about. Whenever it comes to the different climates between Florida and and Australia, it is way more comparable than the climates between New York and Florida. Would you agree with that? The data that I just listed off for you, would you agree with that?
On like average temperature, probably.
Average temperature, probably. Okay.
Yeah, I have no
That was
reason
the
to
case,
dispute
right?
that. Okay,
All right, fantastic. So they're going to be more comparable, right?
okay. That's one variable, a slight
All right,
one.
fantastic.
That's fine.
No,
Right.
it's not a slight one. It's a very dramatic
Sure it is.
variable. The climate with which a virus spreads, it's huge.
Yeah, so is the immune system of the elderly, which is
The
another thing that
elderly,
we brought up.
right? The
The
poly-
Australian gene like makes the elderly like better, maybe. Like, I
No,
don't
but
know.
the Florida gene, where the bunch of retirees are, it's like the retirement settlement of the United States. You would think that there would be some disproportionate effects from that, right, Bunk?
Which is probably why we go ahead and we compare those different variables.
Which
Again,
is
we can
what,
take a
which
look
is
at
what Rob is
lockdown
trying to
studies,
dive
right?
into. It's exactly what Rob's trying to dive into
Look
with
at Rob
you.
lockdown studies. I'm also correct.
But you're like, there's just one variable, and that's all that matters.
Well,
When
it's not-
clearly, that's not
I,
true.
I didn't say that at all. You have to
Yes,
like
you did.
completely. Did you
exactly what you
unplug your
made it sound
headphones for this
like.
conversation?
Exactly what you made it sound like. Now you're pivoting and diverting again.
Oh yeah, I'm pivoting. I'm diverting. I'm doing
problem
all
is,
the
Bunk,
debate
if you'll let me
tactics. But
finish,
no, what I
the
said,
problem
as
is-
I said before, when we were talking about this, that's why we would look at studies. That's why we would look at comparable places with comparable climates and comparable amounts of elderly. That's why we would look at those things, right?
No, what
No, that's
I
not what
said
you
from the
said.
get-go,
Cool.
right from the get-go, what I said that you began disputing was that there are more variables between two different countries than there are between states, right? That's what I said. And there's all sorts of variables. So we looked at two states that were comparable when it came to population density, Florida and New York. And
Also,
not only did the lockdown,
I have to cut in, but I actually I gotta roll. The panel went over
Yeah.
the time I
Yeah,
expected to be here, but I gotta actually bounce out. I have something else I have to do. But I appreciate you having me on tonight, John, very much.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll do something again down the road. Thank you, Synth, and thank you, Bunk, as well. Sorry
right.
to have to dip. It just went a little longer than I thought. I'll see you.
No,
guys.
no, that was my fault. We kind of the
No
rounds took a little
problem,
life of
dude.
their own, so it was good. But no, thank you for being here, man. I do appreciate that. In fact,
Also, looking at
we are.
the given data around Sweden, it seems the population density is gonna be wildly different. But yeah, like that would be another
Just
reason.
say goodbye to
Quick,
me,
quick,
fucking
quick.
Bunk. Say
All
goodbye,
right,
Andrew.
goodbye, Andrew. I
All
always
right,
appreciate
see you
debating
later,
with you. It's
Bunk.
way more interesting than debating with half the other people that I talk with. All right, appreciate you coming out.
See you.
Yeah,
All right,
there you
guys.
go.
Look, I understand
I was
temperature.
wrong
Hold
on
on,
the Sweden
guys,
thing.
guys,
No,
real quick.
I want to make sure.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
was
Go
wrong
ahead.
on the Sweden thing. I was thinking of Norway. My apologies.
Fair enough. All right, gentlemen, we have ran over on time. Normally we end this at 9:30. It's currently 10:09. If somebody wants to continue this on their own stream, you are more than welcome to. But we are gonna have to go wrap it up. Still got I have some other things I have to deal with as well. But
Totally
I do want to do outro real quick for each of us that are still here. So you guys can go ahead 1 minute again where they can find you. Make sure you tell them where your social medias are so the viewers, if they liked or didn't like something you said, they will happily go. And again, for anybody that's viewing on my channels, I am not encouraging trolling. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you have something you disagree with anybody on, go to the channel, ask them about it. They can clarify. I think that's fair enough. That's how we learn. That's how we get different perspectives. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start with Rob. Rob, where can everybody find you?
Yeah, so I do an after show after this. So you can find me on my Rumble. It's the only place I'm streaming right now.
Yeah.
That's rumble.com/user/normal America. So you could go over there and find me. I'll stay on until about midnight probably. But yeah, thanks again, John. And I know we go back and forth, but I enjoyed everyone on this panel. I really enjoyed it. And it's nice always winning. So that always feels good. But no,
Oh,
seriously,
yeah.
I do. Thank you guys so much. I had fun.
All right.
All right, let's kick it down to Synth. Synth, go ahead.
So I guess we all learned a lot about Sweden today. Rob learned that it is not the same latitude as New York. Bunk learned that there was, in fact, not a lockdown in Sweden.
I was
we're all
actually-
Sweden expert. I can't. Oh, fuck.
I'm a Swedish expert personally.
Yeah, but what none of us learned is that if you want to take a look at COVID deaths in Sweden versus the other countries around it, which are actually relatively good to compare because they're all relatively culturally very going to be homogenous. They're all going to have relatively similar population densities, but somewhat different. You'll see that in the case of Sweden, there's like 23,000 deaths, and they have 10 million population. And in the case of Denmark, you have only 8,000, which means per capita deaths in Denmark, which did do a lockdown, they're being better than Sweden, which didn't. But I don't know. Check me out on YouTube, youtube.com/SINTHE. You should also check out my friend Paul's channel, Polyglot TV, on YouTube.
Appreciate that. And Bunk, over to you, sir.
Okay, sick. My name is Bunk. I've really appreciated the debate today. Since it's one of my favorite people to debate alongside, and Rob, Nor, and Andrew are two of my favorite conservatives to debate. It's way more refreshing than debating all of the dumb fuck retards that I find on Twitter. You can find me at youtube.com/@bunkpolitics or twitter.com/bunkpolitics. I do a lot of the arguing on my channel. I do a lot of research and a lot of different streams covering various different subjects. Yeah, I really appreciated being on this panel. It was very, very fun, very interesting, very fiery. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate y'all coming. I know you probably have better things to do on a Friday night than sit around debating other people. But again, thank you for perspectives. Thank you for keeping it somewhat respectful. I appreciate that. As always, y'all are always welcome back on the show in the future. And we'll have, next time I'll do better to have more controversial topics so it's not so much of a, the first two rounds were a lot of agreement going on. So, but anyway, appreciate y'all being here. You can check me out at John Burke over on Rumble, the podcast, All American Savage Show. And also this episode is brought to you by shellshockcbd.com. If you need help with sleep, anxiety, things such as that, go check it out. It is American made, veteran owned. We appreciate your love and support there. Again, shellshockcbd.com. All right, gentlemen, you have a wonderful, wonderful evening. And thank you again for being here.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. See y'all. If anyone wants to stick around, I'm staying till midnight. It's up to you guys.
Yeah, sure. I'm down to hop into a Discord server and